Reef in Australia and go scuba diving without consulting Tina about it. Gabe and Tina had planned to explore the sunken ship, the Townsville Titanic, which sank in 1911. However, Tina was not a skilled diver, unlike Gabe, who was an experienced scuba diver with over 50 dives under his belt. He was even completing a rescue diving course. Gabe had occasionally taken Tina scuba diving in a pool, but only in calm waters and under the supervision of lifeguards. Gabe made the decision to have Tina learn to scuba dive before the honeymoon or at home. He was serious about it, and Tina felt she had no choice but to comply. Gabe even went so far as to borrow money to buy Tina her own scuba gear and pay for lessons. However, Tina's first instructor was not impressed with her skills and warned Gabe that she was not fit for open ocean diving. Gabe angrily interrupted the dive instructor, accusing him of not explaining the lesson clearly. As a result, the second instructor promptly refunded Tina for the unfinished class, and on October 11th, Tina and Gabe were married and flew to Australia just 2 days later for a lavish honeymoon paid for with a $10,000 wedding gift. Gabe's honeymoon with Tina included spending time in Sydney, where they walked around the city, visited the aquarium, and the zoo. At first, Tina was excited, but as their trip to the Great Barrier Reef approached, she became increasingly saddened. On October 21st, they flew to Townsville and in the evening boarded a boat to the Great Barrier Reef, a dream destination for many divers. According to employees at the diving company, they didn't appear to be experienced divers. Even Gabe, who had completed diving courses and had some experience, seemed unsure of how to use the equipment, as if he had never seen it before. Despite this, Gabe assisted Tina in passing her pre-dive exam, a test that is usually administered individually. Additionally, when the instructor offered to help Tina underwater, she declined the offer. The dive log noted the presence of a strong current on that day, a crucial detail that should not be overlooked. Upon arrival, Gabe assisted his wife in organizing their equipment, which they had purchased in the US, and prepared to rent scuba tanks. Gabe chose an 11-liter tank for himself, while his wife used an 8.5-liter tank, which was unusually small for the location and potentially hazardous given her limited diving experience. Their initial attempt to dive to the Townsville Titanic was unsuccessful. Tina required a weight belt to descend, and Gabe initially struggled to operate the underwater computer, which monitors the safe rate of descent and ascent, as well as the oxygen levels in the cylinders. After returning to the boat to regroup, Gabe was able to use the computer, and they made a second attempt. The wreck lay at a depth of 49 feet, and Tina made the first descent, with Gabe following close behind. At first, everything was fine, but then Tina suddenly stopped, waved at me, and signaled she wanted to ascend. I recognized this as a panic response, which she had shown before. We were halfway up the dive at this point, so I decided to stay with her at the same depth to help her calm down and get used to the pressure. However, Tina continued to breathe rapidly and deeply, which was unsafe. Gabe realized she was sinking, and Gabe tried to grab her waist to hold her in place. But she swung her arms violently, knocking Gabe's mask off his face. While Gabe was putting his mask back on, Tina quickly moved away from Gabe. Gabe tried to swim after her, but he couldn't catch up. Gabe then decided to return to the surface to get help from the lifeguards. On his way to the surface, Gabe encountered another diver who appeared unconcerned and did not respond to Gabe's distress signals. There were 2 Asian divers with Gabe at the time, but neither confirmed Gabe's claim that he had attempted to help his wife. A subsequent police investigation, including analysis of underwater computer data, revealed that Gabe had initially attempted to swim to his struggling wife, but quickly abandoned the attempt, despite the relative lack of urgency to surface. Gabe followed standard procedure, ascending gradually and pausing at predetermined depth levels. However, the other divers later stated to the police that, in their opinion, Gabe had the opportunity to save his wife but chose not to do so. Furthermore, this incident occurred at the beginning of the dive, so Gabe had sufficient oxygen in his tanks to have potentially reached the ocean floor and returned to the surface without compromising his own safety. The rescuers quickly sprang into action after locating Tina, but unfortunately, it was too late. Tina found lying on her back at 82 feet, Tina received 40 minutes of artificial respiration on the yacht's deck, but these efforts were unsuccessful. Gabe kept his distance from his wife during the incident, standing off to the side and sniffing his nose, according to witnesses. However, other passengers reported that he was friendly and even played cards with them on the way to the shore. Gabe denied this in court. The autopsy results for Tina were not entirely clear-cut. While there were no obvious signs of a violent death, there were bruises on her neck and blood in her nostrils, which could be attributed to the 82-degree depth at which her body was found. There was no alcohol in her system, but high levels of ibuprofen and paracetamol were detected, which are commonly used to treat seasickness. A small amount of fluid was also found in her lungs. The report concluded that Tina died from drowning, but it's possible that she drowned after already being deprived of oxygen. An investigation by the Australian Water Police found no malfunctions with Tina's diving gear. It would have been easy for the police to dismiss the incident as a tragic accident. A novice diver ignored safety procedures and lost his life, a sad occurrence. However, several suspicious aspects of the case made it difficult to close the case. The autopsy results were inconclusive, and the dive team reported that the deceased's husband, Gabe, had been behaving strangely, inconsistent with the usual grief response of a husband who had just lost his wife. These conflicts dragged on as the investigation progressed, and Gabe realized that the detectives were watching him very closely. Furthermore, Tina's parents were unwilling to accept that the incident was an accident and wanted to see their son-in-law held accountable for failing to help her. During the initial interview, police observed Gabe in a state of shock, exhibiting erratic behavior, including crying, laughing, and jerking around. Gabe repeatedly asked to call his father, complaining of an earache and begging him to inform Tina's parents of this. Gabe was released late at night and went to the company's yacht to request a place to stay for the night. He explained that the trip was supposed to last 2 days, but due to his wife's death, they had only been there for 24 hours. He also asked for a refund of half the cost of the dive, as he never got to see the sunken ship. On October 24th, Gabe's mother flew to Townsville to support her son and help him find a lawyer. At Gabe's request, they visited the morgue to see his wife one last time. However, because Gabe was still considered a suspect, the morgue employee alerted the detective in charge of the case, who was recording the scene without Gabe's knowledge. Gabe was overcome with grief, crying and holding his wife's hand, and apologizing for not being able to protect her. Gabe's personality was a subject of conflicting opinions. Some people described him as a kind and humorous man, while others saw him as tyrannical. However, everyone agreed that Gabe and Tina's relationship was unhappy. Tina had previously confided in her friends and family that she had married Gabe out of fear of being alone, and her friends later confirmed this after her death. A friend of Tina's also came forward with a disturbing revelation. Shortly before her death, Tina had confided in this friend that Gabe had forced her to take out a life insurance policy on herself, naming him as the beneficiary. This was corroborated by the insurance agent who had sold them the policy. Furthermore, the taxi driver who drove the newlyweds to the yacht on the day of their departure told authorities that Tina had cried the entire way, while Gabe showed no concern for her distress. Amanda Phillips shared another story that sheds light on Tina's relationship. At a Christmas party, Gabe filmed her peeing in the bathroom, edited the footage, and then played it to a group of guests. He found it funny, but the other guests were embarrassed. The incident was disturbing, but another act was even more alarming. During a funeral, Gabe removed jewelry from Tina's body. However, an even more disturbing act was caught on camera during the 2008 trial. A video showed Gabe visiting Tina's grave, taking all the flowers and throwing them into a nearby trash can. Tina's father was determined to catch the person who stole the flowers from Tina's grave. He set up a hidden camera on the next row of monuments, but was shocked to see Gabe on the footage. Gabe's defense in court was that he and his wife had discussed the death of one of their relatives during their honeymoon, and that the absence of flowers on the grave was her request. However, this explanation seems very strange and unlikely. The investigation into Tina's death might have taken much longer if the police hadn't discovered a crucial piece of evidence. Gabe claimed that Tina had drowned while he was trying to put a mask on her face, but this story didn't add up. It was impossible for someone to put a mask on underwater without an air supply, unless they were using someone else's oxygen. In this case, the police suspected that Gabe had used Tina's oxygen to stage the incident. In November 2008, the Australian police arrested Gabe, and his trial began on June 5, 2009. Gabe initially pleaded guilty to failing to save his wife. He was convicted of negligent homicide and served 18 months in prison. After his release, he returned to the U.S., but was later charged with first-degree murder in a U.S. court. The prosecution's case hinged on the idea that Gabe had intentionally killed his wife in order to collect life insurance payouts. In his defense, Gabe's lawyer argued that the diving company was responsible for the death, alleging that their employees had failed to adequately ensure the safety of the tourists in their care. The lawyer alleged that the company was now trying to shift the blame to Gabe, fearing the loss of their business license. Gabe had already served his sentence abroad, and his lawyer argued that the insurance payout of $33,000 was outweighed by the costs of hiring lawyers and obtaining additional expert opinions. The prosecutor refused to acknowledge the irony that Gabe, a trained expert in drowning rescue, was unable to save his wife. When Gabe presented his defense, he spoke directly to the jury, expressing his emotional pain and frustration. For 7 years, I have been haunted by the memory of that tragic day. The public has vilified me, accusing me of being responsible for my wife's death, labeling me a murderer. Not a single person has looked me in the eye and offered any compassion or understanding. Instead, many people want me to suffer, and I can only sympathize with my late wife's parents, who will understandably never forgive me, no matter how hard I try to make amends. While people often express sympathy for parents who lose a child, saying, "I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child," I've never heard anyone say, "I can't imagine what it's like to lose a spouse, especially on a honeymoon." I've been criticized for not doing enough to save my wife, Tina. I've already paid the price for that, and I've lived with the guilt for 7 years. Some of you might think I should have died with her, but I was afraid of death and wanted to survive. I wanted to live then, and I still want to live now. Regarding Gabe's case, the court found him not guilty due to lack of evidence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelly Clayton. Kelly Clayton, also known as Kelly Stage Clayton, resides in Cotton, New York. Kelly Clayton had a promising life ahead of her. In high school, she was an exemplary student, excelling academically and serving as a role model for her peers. Her academic achievements were impressive, and she passed exams with ease. Despite her academic focus, Kelly's appearance was often described as model-like, and she could have pursued a career in modeling if she had chosen to do so. Following high school, Kelly enrolled in a teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, which brought immense pride to her parents. However, after a few years, Kelly suddenly lost interest in her studies. It is unclear what triggered this change, but she eventually withdrew from the university and informed her parents that she no longer wanted to pursue a teaching career. Kelly felt that she was too young to be confined to a life of grading notebooks and managing classrooms. Instead, she expressed a desire to travel and experience life to the fullest. Her parents were disappointed and upset by her decision, leading to a 6-month estrangement from their daughter. Kelly's life took an unexpected turn when she met Tom Clayton at a party hosted by mutual friends. Tom was immediately smitten with Kelly and began showering her with attention. His athletic physique and attractive appearance made him a standout, which wasn't surprising given his successful hockey career. As a semi-professional player for the Jackal team, Tom was known for his strength and aggression on the ice. However, he realized his hockey career would eventually end due to physical limitations. Tom would have to retire and enjoy the game from the sidelines, either by attending live matches or watching his favorite team on television. They continued with their lives, starting by returning to New York to get married. They then moved to North Carolina and eventually settled in the small town of Cato, which had only a few thousand residents. Tom started a franchise that specialized in rebuilding houses damaged by fires or disasters. He also worked for a friend's company in a related field. Kelly, on the other hand, had dropped out of university and was working as a waitress. Although she changed jobs, she continued to work even after having 2 children. Tom's income was sufficient for the family, and Kelly could have quit her job to care for their daughters, but she chose to continue working to earn extra money. She used this extra income to buy toys and pamper her children. On September 28, 2015, Tom went to play poker with his friends, the Millers, as he usually did. He preferred to attend these gatherings alone, as playing for money required a certain level of skill and experience. Additionally, someone had to stay home with the children, and bringing the whole family would have turned the evening into a noisy and chaotic affair, detracting from the enjoyment of the game. That evening, Tom was on a losing streak, but instead of giving up, he tried to win back his losses. He suggested that anyone who wanted to stay and play until morning was welcome to do so, but no one took him up on the offer, and he ended up going home. At home, a horrific scene unfolded before Tom's eyes. His wife lay in a pool of her own blood, severely beaten and, at first glance, appeared lifeless. Panicked, Tom frantically searched the rooms for his children. Fortunately, they were unharmed but terrified. He quickly scooped up his daughters and rushed to his neighbor Derek's house, desperate to shield them from the gruesome sight of their mother's battered body. From Derek's house, Tom called the police, struggling to process the chaos. The officer who arrived at the scene found Tom kneeling beside his wife's body, attempting to administer CPR. However, the emergency medical technicians soon intervened and pulled Tom away, revealing the devastating truth: Kelly had been deceased for an extended period, and nothing could be done to revive her. The house was in disarray, with blood covering both floors. The bedroom showed signs of an intense struggle between Kelly and her killer, who carried out the brutal act despite the presence of children in the house. It appeared Kelly had been pushed down the stairs, as evidenced by the broken banister, and brutally beaten with a blunt object until the killer was certain she was dead. No signs of knife or gunshot wounds were found. The officer filming the crime scene observed that Tom seemed lost and in shock. He wandered aimlessly, briefly entering the room before exiting, and was unable to provide the officer with basic information, such as the location of the children's room or the emergency exit. However, when asked about his whereabouts during the murder, Tom calmly stated he had spent the evening at a friend's house playing poker. The officer, failing to obtain clear information from Tom, proceeded to question the neighbor and the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, described the perpetrator as a robber. According to Charlie, she and her sister were drifting off to sleep when they heard their mother scream loudly from the next room. Their mother yelled, "Charlie, run away from here," and then the whole house shook violently. They cautiously left their room and saw the perpetrator leaning over their mother, beating her with what looked like a hammer. They ran back into the nursery, blocked the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. Fortunately, the perpetrator wasn't looking for them, as the nightstand wouldn't have been enough to stop him. When asked to describe the perpetrator, Charlie said he was big, like a bear. He wore blue jeans, a black shirt, and a mask similar to the one her father wears when hunting. Charlie also noted that the perpetrator's eyes looked like her father's, but she didn't remember anything else, as she only caught a brief glimpse before getting scared and running away. Police officers investigating the house couldn't find evidence to support her claim that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at the front or back doors, but the garage gate was open, which could have been an entry point. However, nothing was stolen from the house, including jewelry and cash, and the cabinets were all closed. This was unusual, as burglars typically search every area. Officers quickly suspected that Tom, he, was involved in the murder. They believed he was pretending to be a grieving husband and had actually killed his wife to collect insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, Tom could potentially receive up to $1 million. The police just needed to gather evidence to solve the case, especially since the daughter mentioned that the perpetrator's mask and eyes resembled her father's. However, the police couldn't find the hunting mask in the house. After discovering Tom's whereabouts on the night in question, the police interviewed the other poker players. One of Tom's friends was incredulous. "You think Tom is the killer? That's unbelievable. His wife was just murdered, and instead of finding the real culprit, you're focusing on him." Another friend, less emotional, chimed in, "Tom couldn't have done it. He worked 2 jobs non-stop because he loved Kelly and their kids. It's just not possible. Besides, he was with us the entire night, playing poker. Even when everyone else was tired, he wanted to keep playing." Laura, an acquaintance of Tom's, shared her concerns during a break in the game. She recalled that Tom had asked to borrow her phone, claiming he had left his in the car, which was only 10 meters away. Laura found this odd but lent him her phone anyway. Tom stepped outside to make the call, but when Laura checked her phone's call history later, there was no record of the call, suggesting that Tom had deleted it. Laura discussed this incident with her husband, who had been sitting next to Tom at the poker table. He noticed that Tom wasn't paying attention to the game, instead keeping his head down, focusing on something on the table. It turned out that Tom had his phone with him the whole time, which raised more questions. Why did Tom borrow Laura's phone if he had his own? Who was he trying to call, and why couldn't he use his own phone? After Laura's testimony, the police re-questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and she reiterated that the robber resembled her father. The next testimony came from the niece of Kelly. She explained that she hadn't told her Aunt Kelly about Tom's true nature because she didn't want to upset Kelly. Aunt Kelly adored Tom. The niece felt her truth wasn't needed, implying that it wouldn't change anything. The niece saw Tom as a person with 2 sides. On the surface, he appeared caring and attentive, often showering Aunt Kelly with attention and gifts, and even helping with childcare, which is more than many fathers do. However, his behavior at work revealed a completely different personality. Recognizing her niece's concerns about being young and alone, Aunt Kelly had set up a job for her with Tom the previous summer. During her employment, the niece handled tasks such as correspondence, registration, and managing documents. At first, her interactions with Tom were strictly professional, mainly because she didn't know him well before working for him. One day, Tom got drunk and came to the office, revealing to the niece that his family life was a facade. He confessed to loving his daughters, but not his wife, Aunt Kelly. He had been unfaithful, having multiple affairs during their marriage, and considered leaving her but stayed due to financial concerns. It was later also confirmed by female participants of a poker game that Tom was indeed unfaithful, having relationships with 2 women present at the game. Additionally, Kelly's 16-year-old niece shared information about Michael Beard, another employee of Tom's firm. Michael was doing repair work on houses after a fire, but there were frequent reports of items going missing from the houses where he worked. Tom initially doubted his customers when they accused Michael Beard of theft during fire restoration jobs. However, as the complaints continued, it became clear that Michael was indeed stealing from clients. Additionally, there were allegations of Michael showing up to work intoxicated. When Tom finally confronted Michael about his behavior, he was understandably upset and disappointed. Despite having every right to be angry, Tom took a surprisingly compassionate approach. Instead of simply firing Michael and cutting ties, Tom actively reached out to other companies and recommended Michael for a job. When none of those opportunities panned out, Tom took it a step further and offered Michael work around his own house, doing odd jobs like cutting the grass, watering plants, and making minor repairs. This decision showed that Tom was willing to give Michael a second chance, even if it meant finding alternative employment for his former employee. The detective brought Michael Beard in for questioning. Michael claimed he only stole because he and his family were in dire need of money. He expressed his gratitude towards Tom, his former employer, who had always defended him. Michael also praised Tom's wife, who had shown kindness by feeding him and giving his children old clothes. However, the investigation took a turn when Michael's wife, Holly, was interrogated. She revealed that Tom had offered Michael a job, which Michael had not mentioned earlier, and promised to pay him $10,000 for it. This new information raised suspicions about Michael's alibi. He was called back to the station and hooked up to a lie detector. The test results indicated that Michael was lying, and he eventually cracked under pressure and began to confess. The investigation was sparked by the death of Kelly, which had shaken Michael. He had even attended church to pray for her soul, showing that he was genuinely distraught by her passing. Despite initial doubts about his involvement, the police had released him after the first round of questioning. However, Holly's testimony changed everything. Tom promised Michael $10,000 to kill his wife, Kelly, and make it look like an accident. The plan was for Michael to sneak into the house while Tom was playing poker, strangle Kelly, and then start a fire to cover up the crime. The house was insured for a large sum of money. Michael found 2 cans of gasoline waiting for him in the garage, which he would use to set the fire. He quietly entered the house while everyone was asleep. He crept upstairs to Kelly's bedroom, but she was either awake or woken by the sound of the door. She saw Michael and began screaming. Kelly's screaming startled Michael, and he tried to strangle her. However, Kelly was stronger than she appeared and fought back. A fierce struggle ensued, moving from the bedroom to the kitchen. Michael was surprised by Kelly's strength, which made the fight much more intense than he had anticipated. Michael was in a state of shock and panic, flailing his arms wildly and grabbing at Kelly's clothes, unable to focus on the fight. In contrast, Kelly was fighting for her life, accurately aiming her blows at Michael's face. If the police had arrived at Michael's location sooner, they would have seen evidence of the beating he had taken. After a prolonged struggle, Michael slammed Kelly's head into the wall with great force, knocking her to the ground. She was unable to get up for some time. Michael then produced a hammer and continued to strike Kelly's head until she showed no signs of life. Consumed by rage and panic, Michael fled the house, forgetting that Tom had instructed him not only to kill Kelly but also to set fire to the house to conceal the crime. Mark Blanford, Michael's accomplice, was just the driver. Knowing Michael from working together and staying with him, Mark had not been surprised when Michael, known for petty theft, had asked him to drive during a break-in. Mark had mentioned that he had initially wanted to decline Michael's request, but that the offer of $500 had been tempting. After some deliberation, Michael had convinced him to participate. Michael's plan had been to rob a businessman, and he had needed Mark's assistance to make a quick getaway before the police arrived. Michael had also promised to help with the car. Mark had eventually agreed, but only on the condition that he could park the car at a safe distance from the house. Michael had accepted this condition. That evening, Mark had waited for Michael in the car in a dark alley, and Michael had come back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling him to move as fast as possible. Michael hadn't had any bag or sack on him, which hadn't looked much like a robbery. Mark hadn't asked him any questions along the way, simply because he hadn't wanted to know anything. He had just wanted his $500, which he hadn't ended up getting. On the way out, Michael had asked Mark to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of there. Mark had stopped there, and Michael had hastily stripped off his outer garments and thrown them off the bridge. Mark had offered to show the place if needed. Indeed, police officers who had arrived on the scene at Mark's behest had found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Michael had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. Tom denied ordering the massacre of his wife, claiming Michael acted alone. According to Tom, Michael knew Tom had money and was motivated by resentment over losing his job. Tom suggested Michael robbed his house, unaware Kelly was home, resulting in her death. However, Laura, a woman who played poker with Tom, revealed that Tom used her cell phone to make a call. The detective obtained the call records, confirming suspicions. The records showed Tom called Michael on the night of September 28th to 29th. Michael was tried first and maintained he was hired to set fire to the house for insurance purposes. He claimed he didn't kill Kelly and the blood on his clothes came from touching her dead body. He had disposed of his belongings to avoid suspicion of being at the Claytons' house that night. His testimony seemed convincing. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before delivering a guilty verdict on all counts against Michael Beard, who now faced life imprisonment. In contrast, Tom's lawyers managed to gather records of conversations and correspondence between Tom and Michael, but none of these clearly mentioned their nefarious plan. Furthermore, the prosecution's attempts to obtain billing transcripts of Tom's movements yielded no concrete evidence. All the evidence against Tom was circumstantial. However, one key detail caught the attention of investigators. The car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company. Moreover, on the day of the incident, Tom had arrived at the office in his personal Toyota but then switched to the company's pickup truck, which was later driven to Michael's house and left there. The truck was returned to the office the day after the tragedy. This suggested that Tom had, in fact, provided Michael with the car that he and Mark used to commit the crime. It was a crucial piece of evidence that the jury testified to during the trial. The 6-day trial concluded with the jury finding Tom guilty of hiring Michael to commit the heinous crime. Michael subsequently appealed, using the testimony of young Charlie, who claimed that the eyes behind the mask belonged to her father. However, the court dismissed the appeal due to the matching description of the clothing found under the bridge. Consequently, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard were sentenced to life in prison. Mark received a 4-year prison sentence for manslaughter. The custody of Tom and Kelly's children was awarded to Kelly's sister, Kim. With time, Charlie has learned to cope with the tragedy. Although she occasionally remembers her mother, she refuses to discuss her father, whom she will never want to see again. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Borden family. Michael and Catherine met in school, bonding over homework and walks. They became inseparable friends, sharing secrets and learning from each other. Their friendship blossomed into romance, and Michael eventually asked Catherine on a date, declaring his love. They got married in a beautiful ceremony, vowing to love each other through life's ups and downs. After 10 years, the Borden family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania, a peaceful town founded by the Moravian Church in 1756. The town's faithful residents, including Amish families, sought refuge from modern chaos, living simply and avoiding modern tech. The devout Bordens chose Lititz for its ideal setting to raise children, surrounded by calm and serenity. Michael was an active member of the local church community, where he taught Sunday school lessons. His wife Catherine managed the household and supported him in his community work. While he focused on spiritual growth, Michael also worked as a manager at a printing company to provide for their everyday needs. Over time, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Large families like theirs were common in Lititz, where parents hoped to protect their children from the outside world's hardships and dangers. Regular church attendance, youth groups, and homeschooling were a big part of family life. Interactions between families were mostly limited to religious gatherings and celebrations. Michael and his wife built a peaceful home life, raising their kids in faith and discipline. When their eldest sons left for university, the 3 younger kids continued homeschooling, pleasing their parents. Neighbors and friends praised the kind, responsive, and interesting kids: Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel. Kara, the eldest daughter, challenged traditional values in her teens. Despite her dad's disapproval, she joined the soccer team, snuck out to discos, and did forbidden things. Her dad was troubled, and talks often ended in arguments and her running away. Kara sought romantic relationships and showed interest in boys. In 2005, David, 18, and Kara, 14, connected at a homeschooling support group. They formed a close bond, hiding it from their parents, and used social media to exchange messages, pouring their hearts out. They crafted coded messages to keep their communication private. Kara and David's letter exchange wasn't enough, so they secretly met in person. At first, they took innocent walks, but their friendship blossomed into romance. They snuck out to discos, spending nights together. David, older, had experienced first love, while Kara's inexperience made her feelings overwhelming. Her joy was radiant, but her obedience to her parents was feigned, driven by fear of discovery. But sooner or later, every secret is exposed. One day, Kara couldn't keep her secret hidden anymore and confided in her sister. She showed her a photo of David, told her about how they met and how they were deeply in love and willing to overcome all obstacles to be together. They were even planning to run away to be together. However, Kara's sister was worried about her and told their mother about their planned elopement, which ultimately revealed the secret of the young lovers. One early morning, Kara snuck back home, feeling elated after her date with David. But her mother was waiting in her room, clearly aware of her secret. At breakfast, Kara's parents forbade her from seeing David, deeming him unsuitable due to their concerns about violence and drugs. Angry and disappointed, Kara's father grounded her. That night, Kara spent her free time at David's house. At 5:30 a.m., David drove Kara back to her neighborhood and dropped her off near her house. They agreed that once Kara was safely back in her room, she would send him a text message to let him know she was okay. However, the message never came. David tried calling her home phone several times and sent her a few messages on social media, but he didn't hear back from her. An hour later, Kara finally got in touch with him, explaining that she had gotten caught by her parents and asked him to come over so they could talk to him. David arrived on time, but Kara's parents were fiercely opposed. Her dad forbade David from seeing Kara, deeming her too young for a relationship. David's declarations of love fell flat, with her dad threatening to call the police if he saw them together again. The emotional confrontation ended with Kara grounded and David leaving, feeling rejected and heartbroken for the first time. The lovers' separation was agonizing. They devised a plan to deceive everyone by pretending to break up while secretly continuing their affair. In public, they convincingly played the part of former lovers, not even greeting each other. Kara's parents were convinced they'd protected her from a youthful mistake. However, David missed Kara terribly, often reading Shakespeare and imagining openly serenading her like Romeo. David Ludwig took drastic measures by calling Kara's home to request a meeting with her father, Michael. On November 13, 2015, the young man arrived at the Borden residence, determined to discuss their plans to get married. Ludwig confessed his love for Kara and their intentions to Michael, but he received a dismissive response, saying it would never happen. Prepared for this reaction, Ludwig, fueled by anger, pulled out a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he walked towards the front door. Next, he targeted Kara's mother, Catherine, shooting her while she sat in a chair. Ludwig then searched the house for Kara, calling out her name, but she was nowhere to be found. He got into his car, started the engine, and began to drive away. That's when he spotted Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car, expressing her desire to escape and start a new life with David. They fled the city in David's red car, leaving the chaos behind. Kara Borden was missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Borden, were found dead. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, which led them to track the teenagers. The footage also showed that Kara didn't resist and had willingly gone with David Ludwig. As a result, the charges against Ludwig for abducting Kara were dropped. Alerts were issued to police across the East, including in Pennsylvania and Indiana, as the couple was spotted heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. On Monday morning, authorities received a tip about a vehicle matching the description parked near a truck stop outside Fort Wayne. Police rushed to the area, but the car was already gone. State police were alerted, and they spotted the car around noon on Interstate 70 in Belleville. David Ludwig got onto the interstate, leading police on a high-speed chase at 90 to 95 miles per hour on a two-lane highway. According to State Trooper David Cooch, who was involved in the pursuit, Ludwig drove extremely recklessly and dangerously, causing multiple accidents, much like in an action movie. The district attorney announced that, despite the initial kidnapping charge being dropped, they would still face charges for the brutal murder of Michael and Catherine Borden. David Ludwig and Kara Beth Borden went on the run following the tragic incident, evading authorities for approximately 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. While Kara Beth was not charged with any crime, David Ludwig was detained without bail, facing charges of murder and abduction. In the aftermath, Kara was taken in by relatives and church members for care. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, following a high-speed chase that ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the murder of the Bordens, a crime allegedly committed after a prolonged dispute. Ludwig confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm, stating that he had deliberately intended to shoot the Bordens if they got in his way, and that he did so. During a search of his vehicle after his arrest, no weapons were found. However, when the police searched his home, they discovered an arsenal of 54 firearms, which belonged to his father, a hunter who had taught Ludwig how to handle weapons. The police also found an 18-minute video on a laptop in his home, which showed Ludwig discussing plans to invade another family's home, armed with weapons. The plan was abandoned due to the presence of too many cars. Although the police declared Kara Borden a victim in the case, Ludwig claimed that surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove that she was not abducted. He did not resist extradition to Pennsylvania, and a judge ordered him held without bail. Ludwig was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation, and a preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of Ludwig, who was responsible for the deaths of 2 adults in front of their children, was brief, as detailed in court documents. Caitlin, Kara's 13-year-old sister, told investigators that her parents were killed after arguing with David Ludwig for about an hour. According to Caitlin, Ludwig shot her father, and she then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot, which likely killed her mother. Afterwards, Ludwig ran through the house, calling out to Kara. In June 2006, David Ludwig agreed to a plea deal with District Attorney Donald R. Totoro, who who had originally sought the death penalty. As a result, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years. He was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Kara Borden has been under guardianship, represented by legal counsel. In November 2005, it was reported that the charge of abduction against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Kara had voluntarily left with Ludwig, as supported by written statements. Ludwig's lawyer claimed that Kara had accompanied David voluntarily during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance footage showed that she had multiple opportunities to escape. Kara herself admitted that she had run after Ludwig as he left her house. Kara Beth Borden was identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and as a result, the Lancaster County District Attorney did not file criminal charges against her. This decision was influenced by her actions during the investigation and the digital evidence collected from emails, blogs, and texts exchanged with Ludwig. A memorial service was held at Lancaster Bible College, where Kara Beth, surrounded by her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. As a sign of respect and remembrance, the neighborhood adorned their mailboxes with white ribbons. This tragedy left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. David Ludwig was transferred to Indiana's State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove to serve his life sentence for murdering his girlfriend's parents. He was chosen for the prison's youthful offender program, designed for inmates 15 to 20, which focuses on teaching self-responsibility, discipline, and respect for others. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 life sentences for fatally shooting Michael and Catherine Borden in 2005 after they barred him from seeing their 14-year-old daughter. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling against life imprisonment for minors, but the PA Supreme Court denied his petition, agreeing with a lower court that he's not entitled to same consideration since he was 18 at the time. David Ludwig will spend life in prison. The community struggled to understand how well-raised kids committed evil. Despite Christian homeschooling, tragedy struck, leaving questions if parents overlooked or failed to convey values. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Yvonne Baldelli. Yvonne Baldelli was born on June 30, 1969, in a small town in Southern California. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Marjorie and James Fold, with 2 older siblings, Michael and Michelle. Yvonne was especially close to her sister Michelle from a young age. Tragedy struck when Yvonne was 13, with the loss of her mother after a long illness. Her father James remarried a year later to Lillian, who turned out to be a kind and caring stepmother. Yvonne and her siblings developed a wonderful relationship with Lillian, who treated them as her own. Yvonne pursued a good education and experimented with various career paths, but her true passion lay in fashion design. She dreamed of turning her hobby into a successful business. However, her personal life was marked by misfortune. She had 2 failed marriages, the last one ending in divorce from Kevin Baldelli in 2007. Adding to her woes, Yvonne underwent surgery in her youth, which was followed by complications that left her unable to have children. After her second divorce, Yvonne lived a solitary life in her small apartment, where her only constant companion was her beloved dog, whom she lovingly referred to as her child. Despite her challenges, Yvonne remained close to her family, calling her father and sister daily and making it a point to visit them at least once a month. In 2009, as Yvonne was approaching her 40th birthday, she met Brian Brimmager, a married Marine with a young son. Despite being committed, Brian was open to an extramarital affair and confided in Yvonne about his unhappy marriage, stating that his only reason for not filing for divorce was the welfare of his child. Yvonne was taken by Brian's fit appearance and believed him. Having had a loveless marriage, she knew it was tough to leave, especially with kids. She didn't pressure him, thinking his child was the main issue. Little did she know, Brian was a charming liar, using his looks to juggle multiple relationships and fake promises. It became clear that Bremager, who was married, was having an affair with not one, but two women. One of them was Yvonne, and the other was Christine Verhoeven, a beautiful blonde with many influential contacts. Christine worked as an analyst at the White House. When Yvonne found out that her lover, Brian, was cheating on his wife with another woman, she decided to take action. Gathering her courage, she called Brian's wife to inform her that her husband was having an affair, not only with her, but also with another woman. This shocking news sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult decision. In the end, he chose Yvonne, although it's possible that she influenced his decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with Yvonne. At the time, he was still serving in the Marines, but he had been thinking about ending his military career for a while. They seemed genuinely happy, but Yvonne's family remained skeptical of her new partner, questioning the sincerity of his feelings for her. In the summer of 2011, Brian started talking about making drastic changes to his life, including leaving the Marines, moving away from the city, and settling down on a tropical island. Yvonne shared his vision, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever he chose to go. She believed she had found the love of her life and adored him. By September, Yvonne decided to move to Panama's Carino Island, a tropical haven. Her dream was to open a boutique, creating custom outfits for tourists. In early September, Yvonne, Brian, and her dog flew to Panama, then took a ferry to Carino Island, renting an oceanfront house. The island's hot and humid climate attracted tourists, especially divers and surfers, year-round. Brian, a skilled guitar player since his teenage years, brought his instrument to the island with the intention of launching a music career, performing at various entertainment venues. Soon after settling in, he established connections with several local bar owners, and one of them offered him a gig. He would play in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, and as a token of appreciation, the audience would often buy him drinks, leading to a habit of heavy daily drinking. Yvonne's business, on the other hand, struggled to take off, with sluggish sales and meager profits. However, she persevered and found work at one of the bars. She also adopted a second dog, which she found on the island, and decided to keep. She maintained daily contact with her sister Michelle Valenzuela, sharing every detail, but her messages became increasingly brief and somber, causing concern among her family. Initially, the island seemed like a paradise to they. Yvonne had hoped that Brian would propose, and they would have a romantic beach wedding. However, as time passed, Brian showed no signs of rushing into marriage. Their relationship quickly began to deteriorate. In early December, Michelle became concerned when she stopped receiving messages from her sister Yvonne. Then, on December 14, 2011, Michelle received an unexpected call from Yvonne's boyfriend Brian. He asked when he could come by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in Michelle's garage before he and Yvonne had traveled to Panama. This call surprised Michelle because it meant Brian had returned to the US. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she come back or even reached out? Brian told Michelle that he had explained everything in an email he had sent a few days earlier. He also claimed that Yvonne had sent Michelle a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing. So, she turned to her email and discovered two unread messages, one from her sister Yvonne and one from Brian. Brian claimed in his message that Yvonne had left him for a new lover and moved to Costa Rica. However, a message supposedly from Yvonne stated that she had left him after discovering his infidelity and that another woman, Christine Verhoeven, had given birth to his child. This message also claimed that Yvonne had met someone new and gone to Costa Rica with him. It seemed believable at first, especially since Yvonne was unable to have children, and news of her partner's infidelity could have been devastating. However, Yvonne was not one to act impulsively, and it was unusual that she hadn't contacted her sister to discuss her situation. The tone of the message from Yvonne also raised suspicions as it didn't sound like her previous communications. Michelle suggested filing a missing persons report for Yvonne, but Brian was hesitant, claiming she was fine and capable of taking care of herself. He insisted she would come home on her own, but his nervousness and quick departure after picking up his vehicle raised suspicions. Shortly after, a message from Yvonne's phone arrived, stating she would return home in January for their father's birthday. This brought Michelle some relief, and she decided to wait, hoping Yvonne would come back as planned. By mid-January, Yvonne remained missing and hadn't reached out. Meanwhile, Michelle was stunned to learn that Brian had unexpectedly married Christine Verhoeven shortly before the new year began. What made this even more surprising was that he had only parted ways with his previous girlfriend a few weeks earlier. Michelle's concern for her sister's safety prompted her to report Yvonne missing to the police, as she suspected Yvonne hadn't actually gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry to Panama confirmed her fears, verifying that Yvonne Baldelli had not left the country. Michelle's cousin, a programmer, helped trace the IP address of the emails supposedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December. The investigation revealed that the emails were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. As the situation grew increasingly alarming, Michelle quickly informed the police of her discovery. Valenzuela then reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and continued to send messages from her phone and email, impersonating her for about a month. Although there wasn't enough concrete evidence to arrest Brian at the time, law enforcement interviewed him and continued gathering proof of his guilt. It was discovered that Brian had asked Christine to marry him while he was still in Panama with Yvonne, promising they would soon return and raise their daughter together. However, Christine was not aware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on a business trip. 2 months after Yvonne's disappearance, her sister and niece conducted their own investigation and flew to Panama, where they sought the help of Don Winter, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator who specialized in finding missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and the version of events Brian had given. After listening to them, Winter immediately expressed his concern that the chances of Yvonne being alive were low. With his extensive experience in such investigations and using his connections, Winter decided to pressure the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning Yvonne's disappearance into international news. A press conference was also organized, which included Yvonne's family members. After arriving in Panama, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends joined the search for Brian Baldelli and assisted in the investigation. Together, they thoroughly searched the tropical island of Carino, but found no trace of him. The dense undergrowth and swampy marshes, which were home to a wide variety of wildlife, hindered their search efforts. The family also questioned the island's residents about their knowledge of Brian and Yvonne and what they could reveal about the couple's behavior. It became clear that Brian and Yvonne had been drinking excessively and frequently got into loud public arguments, disregarding those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars, drinking and arguing. Moreover, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body, and she rarely removed her sunglasses, seemingly to conceal the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house they rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residents. Meanwhile, FBI agents brought in a specialized team of divers to search the waters surrounding the island for potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches also yielded no results. From the start, Brian was the main suspect in the case, but there was no solid evidence to charge him with. He repeatedly denied any involvement, sticking to the same story that his ex-partner Yvonne had run off with another man. It wasn't until September 21st, 2012, that Brian was finally questioned by the police and a search of his home was conducted. At that time, his wife Christine was at work and Brian was unemployed, staying at home to take care of their child and enjoying his favorite hobby, playing golf. Brian claimed Yvonne left him after discovering his child with another woman, but became anxious when police found Yvonne's laptop on his table. The laptop had messages sent after she supposedly left, including a photo of Yvonne with a bruise and a conversation between Brian and his mistress about their secret affair. The search history showed queries about cleaning bloodstains and removing blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant but circumstantial, as neither Aon's body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Aon didn't definitively prove his guilt. However, a discovery by Don Winter shed more light on the case. Before leaving Panama, Brimminger had sold a machete he owned to a buyer online. During their conversation, he jokingly said he had used the weapon once to finish off a stripper. Although the machete was seized for examination, it didn't initially yield any conclusive evidence. The long-awaited arrest was still pending. Meanwhile, the police had overlooked a crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance to make it seem like she was still alive. Before returning to the US, Brian went to Costa Rica and used the missing woman's card a few times, creating the illusion that she had fled there. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, eventually draining the card before discarding it. However, Brian didn't realize that he was caught on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. In July 2013, a year and a half after the woman vanished, her relatives, armed with evidence collected by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally succeeded in getting Brian arrested. At first, he was held on charges of lying and obstructing the investigation, as there wasn't enough evidence to charge him with anything more serious at that time. By then, Christine had given birth to a second son just a week before his arrest, making Brian a father for the second time. The authorities tried to have an open conversation with the suspect, offering him the opportunity to admit to the crime and reveal the location of Yvonne's body. However, Brian consistently denied any involvement. His lawyer also claimed that since there was no body or direct evidence linking Brian to Yvonne's disappearance, there was no proof of his guilt. In the swamp on the island of Quinero, a worker stumbled upon a gruesome discovery just 2 months after Brian's arrest. While taking a shortcut through the underbrush, the worker spotted an army backpack partially submerged in the water. Curious about what might be inside, the worker opened the bag, only to be met with horror at the sight of a human skull. The worker immediately notified the police, who responded and took the backpack into custody for further examination. Inside, they found fragments of a human body, as well as the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been deliberately dismembered, placed in the bag, and discarded in a remote area, likely intended to never be found. DNA testing later confirmed that the human remains belonged to Yvonne. However, many of her limbs were missing. Further examination by pathologists revealed that Yvonne had suffered a brutal beating before her death, including a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. When the unique chot marks on the victim's bones were matched to the machete's blade, it confirmed that the body had been dismembered with this weapon, as each blade has a distinct signature, similar to human fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. In 2014, Michelle Valenzuela got a cancer diagnosis and after 6 months of intense treatment, realized it was futile. She dedicated her last months to seeking justice for her sister, testifying against Brian and submitting evidence to the court despite her weakening health. Brian assaulted Yvonne in a drunken rage after she discovered his affair, stabbing her to death. He then dismembered her body, killing her dogs, and hid the parts in a backpack in a swamp. Brian fabricated a story about Yvonne leaving him, gaining sympathy from locals, and even found a new girlfriend. However, during the trial, his girlfriend testified against him, and he was forced to admit his guilt, claiming self-defense despite evidence showing he was fully aware of his actions. In the spring of 2016, Brian was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 26 years in prison, with eligibility for parole in 2035. At sentencing, credit was given for his prior service in the Marines, which spared him from a life sentence. Meanwhile, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, maintained her husband's innocence and pledged to stand by him no matter what. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Anna Walsh. Anna Luic, later known as Anna O'Neill, was born on April 18, 1983 in Belgrade, Serbia. She grew up in a cultured family with her younger sister. At the 5th Belgrade Gymnasium, Anna excelled as a standout student. She then attended Belgrade Research University, the most historic and expansive university in Serbia. Anna pursued foreign languages, earning a master's degree in French language and literature at 22. With her diploma, Anna sought a new chapter in the United States, fully supported by her family. In 2005, she settled in the U.S., aiming to further her education in hospitality management. She took administrative roles at prestigious hotels, including the Inn at Little Washington in Virginia. Anna's warm approach, sense of duty, and conflict resolution skills quickly earned her respect from peers and supervisors. Multilingual and charming, she formed connections easily. Beloved by colleagues and friends, Anna seized every chance to shine. She became a U.S. citizen, retaining her Serbian nationality, and enjoyed a high income, investing in property and a car. Her travels further broadened her horizons, and her career flourished, leading to a promotion to senior manager. Anna's captivating qualities, including her intelligence, beauty, slender physique, and radiant smile, drew in numerous admirers. While working at the Wheatley Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts, she met and fell in love with Marcus O'Neill, the hotel's head chef. Their romance ultimately led to their marriage in 2009, at which point Anna took her husband's last name. Born in July 1975 in Boston, Massachusetts, Brian Paul Walsh came from a prominent, wealthy, and respected family. As a young man, he would frequently borrow money from friends, only to fail to repay them. During his college years, he would invite friends to dine at upscale restaurants, then use various tactics to manipulate others into covering his share of the bill. Brian was estranged from his father, Dr. Thomas Walsh, for many years until the elder's death in 2018. The estrangement dated back to when Brian fraudulently withdrew nearly $1 million from his father's personal account and disappeared with the money. Despite this, Dr. Walsh chose not to report the incident to the police and instead tried to persuade Brian to return the money voluntarily. However, when Brian refused, Dr. Walsh cut off all communication with him. By the time of the theft, Brian's parents had already divorced, and his father had started a new family. In response to Brian's actions, Dr. Walsh decided to remove him from his life and will. After Dr. Walsh's passing, Brian reappeared and filed a lawsuit claiming that the will was forged by the doctor's widow and younger children to deny him his rightful inheritance. However, Brian was unable to prove his claims and received no part of the estate. Those who knew Brian described him as greedy, malevolent, and cruel, with a tendency towards violence and a lack of emotional control. He often relied on force to achieve his goals and became dangerous during bouts of anger. In the late 2000s, Brian received treatment in a psychiatric clinic to address his rage issues, during which he was officially diagnosed with sociopathy. Brian and Anna first met in 2014 when Anna was working as a senior reservation manager at the Wheatley Hotel in Massachusetts. At the time, she was married to Marcus O'Neill, who was also employed at the hotel. Brian, who was a guest at the hotel, was immediately drawn to Anna's charm. Despite knowing she was already married, Brian continued to show her increasing attention, which eventually became insistent. Used to getting his way, Brian persisted in pursuing Anna, even after she rejected him. He managed to get her phone number and home address where she lived with her husband and began to harass them relentlessly. In 2015, the Anna were forced to seek police protection from Brian's constant harassment, which continued day and night. Brian would show up at Anna's workplace, call her at home, and send her messages, demanding she leave her husband for him. The situation took a dark turn when Brian threatened to harm Anna and her husband if she didn't comply with his demands. What triggered Anna's change of heart remains unclear, but a year after seeking police protection, she unexpectedly divorced her husband. Months later, Brian became her second husband. They settled into a luxurious home in Quezon, Massachusetts, an upscale neighborhood about 20 miles southeast of Boston. They had 3 sons in quick succession, with the boys being 2, 4, and 6 years old at the time of Anna's disappearance. Despite having a demanding job, Anna successfully balanced her career with motherhood, never taking maternity leave. She became the regional general manager at Tishman Speyer, a real estate company, earning a high salary and becoming the primary breadwinner for the family. Due to her frequent business trips to Washington, D.C., she also bought a second home in her name, where she stayed during these trips. To help take care of their children during her absences, Anna relied on visiting nannies. Meanwhile, Brian was unemployed while his wife was building their family and advancing her career. He had spent most of the $1 million he had taken from his father, and all of Anna's acquisitions were registered in her name. As a result, Brian was actively searching for ways to generate effortless income. Before marrying Anna, Brian had formed a connection with a wealthy individual in South Korea, whose family possessed an impressive art collection. After returning to the U.S., Brian maintained this connection and was unexpectedly asked by his friend to assist in selling several Andy Warhol paintings. Instead of just earning a commission, Brian decided to profit from the transaction. He gained access to a series of abstract Warhol paintings titled Shadow and appraised each one, obtaining authenticity certificates. Then, he created copies of both the paintings and documents. Brian found artists who could create precise replicas, convincing them he needed backups, since each original was worth around $250,000. For several years, he successfully sold fake paintings as originals to collectors worldwide. However, one buyer, an expert in Andy Warhol's work, quickly identified a forgery and sued Brian. The FBI investigated, and in April 2021, Brian pleaded guilty to selling counterfeit art. He was placed under house arrest after his lawyer negotiated a deal, requiring him to return the proceeds to the buyers and avoid prison time. Brian was under house arrest, but he was allowed to leave his house twice a day for specific activities. He could drive his children to and from school and had a 2.5-hour window in the morning to visit a limited list of approved places in his neighborhood, such as stores, pharmacies, and dry cleaners, to buy essential items. On December 31st, 2022, Mrs. Anna Walsh mysteriously disappeared. The Walsh family had planned to celebrate New Year's Eve together at home, just the 5 of them, Anna, Brian, and their 3 young sons. After the boys went to bed early, Anna and Brian stayed at the dinner table. That evening, Anna posted a message on social media, wishing everyone a happy new year, and hinting that the past year had been tough, but she and Brian were still together. Anna was scheduled to fly to Washington, D.C. for work on January 3rd, but when she failed to show up, her employer Tishman Speyer reported her missing to the police on January 4th. Brian also reported her missing, worried that he hadn't been able to contact her for days. According to Brian, he last saw Anna on January 1st when she woke him up early in the morning, claiming she had to go to work due to some issues and her boss had asked her to come in earlier than planned. He believed she then headed to the airport with only a few belongings. However, several inconsistencies in the case soon arose. For instance, Anna had not bought, changed, or reserved a flight ticket for January 1st, and she had not canceled her scheduled flight for January 3rd. Additionally, she was not seen at the airport on either January 1st or 3rd. Furthermore, It was unclear how she left the house since her personal car was still in the garage and she had not called a taxi. Brian's suggestion that she might have hitchhiked was not convincing. Brian's statements and behavior sparked numerous questions. His explanations were contradictory, and he didn't appear particularly concerned about the unfolding events. Despite being unable to contact the mother of his children for over 3 days, he only reported her missing on the 4th day, and only after her workplace called. From the start, Mr. Walsh was considered a prime suspect, yet law enforcement didn't have enough evidence to arrest him or obtain a warrant to search their family home. They conducted a limited inspection with the homeowner's permission, but it didn't yield any results. Brian claimed to have led a normal life during those 3 days, visiting usual stores and doing household chores. However, verifying his claims was challenging, as he often left the house without his phone, which he alleged was frequently taken by his older children to play games without his permission. On January 5th, the police issued a public appeal on TV, showing a photo of Anna and asking anyone who knew her whereabouts or what had happened to her to contact the authorities immediately. However, no one came forward with any information. The last time Anna had been in touch with anyone was on December 31st, when she made phone calls to her mother and sister. Her husband was the last person known to have seen her. Surveillance cameras in the neighborhood did not capture any footage of Anna on the morning of January 1st, making it seem as though she had never left her home. In contrast, her husband was recorded leaving and returning to their home several times, but it was impossible to determine where he had gone. His claim of visiting a supermarket was proven to be false, as his vehicle was not seen on any routes to the store, and he was not spotted inside. It wasn't until January 8th that Brian was arrested for making false statements and was taken in for questioning at the police station. His home was finally searched, and it was discovered that on January 1st, he had visited a hardware store in a different area, which was not on the list of approved locations he was allowed to visit while under house arrest. At the hardware store, Brian spent nearly $500 on a large quantity of cleaning supplies, including plastic sheeting, duct tape, a mop and bucket, and utility rags. He paid in cash, likely hoping to keep his visit secret. During a search of the Walsh family home, disturbing discoveries were made. Although the house appeared normal at first, with no signs of struggle or bloodstains, the basement told a different story. Law enforcement officers found smeared bloodstains everywhere, along with a bloodied knife and saw wrapped in towels, hidden among the clutter. Brian had previously admitted to visiting his mother's home on January 3rd, claiming he needed to help her with household tasks due to her poor health. However, after the grim discoveries in the basement, police suspected that Walsh may have disposed of evidence or parts of his deceased wife's body on his way there. They inspected trash bins in the area where the couple lived, as well as along the road to his mother's house, and found a kitchen hatchet with dried blood and several blood-stained towels, similar to those found in the Walsh basement. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood in the basement on the towels, knife, hatchet, and saw belonged to Anna, confirming her death. The seized laptop and tablet revealed a disturbing search history. Weeks prior to his wife's disappearance, Brian had been actively searching online for information on the most favorable states for divorce in terms of property division. He also looked into whether he could claim the second home in Washington, D.C., which was owned by Anna and registered solely in her name, suggesting a possible motive for the crime. One of the earliest searches, made around 4 a.m. on January 1st, was about how long it takes for a body to decompose. This was followed by nearly 24 searches on how to dispose of a body, including how to clean up blood traces, how to dismember a body, and whether a body could be identified if the teeth were removed. He also searched for information on how long DNA traces last and whether a person could be charged with a crime if the body was never found. All of these searches were conducted on his young child's tablet. By January 3rd, Brian's searches had shifted to inheritance, as he looked into how and when someone can inherit the property of a person who has disappeared. This suggests that he was confident he would avoid punishment and was preparing to claim the inheritance. On January 18th, Brian was officially accused of murdering his wife, even though her body or remains had not been discovered. Prosecutors allege that on New Year's Day, Brian intentionally or accidentally killed his wife, then decided to get rid of her body by dismembering it in their home's basement. He allegedly put the body parts in plastic bags and threw them away in trash cans located in different areas of the city. The area surrounding the Walsh home, as well as nearby empty lands, wooded areas, and bodies of water, were extensively searched for evidence, but nothing was found. The defendant, Brian Walsh, has pleaded not guilty and is refusing to reveal what happened to Anna's body. Recently, Anna had been unhappy and was considering divorcing her husband, which she mentioned several times during phone calls with her mother and sister the day before she vanished. However, her mother did not take Anna's threats seriously and decided to put off her visit. The trial is ongoing, and Brian is being held at the Norfolk Correctional Facility as he awaits his next court date. Anna's mother is following the investigation from her home in Serbia and has not traveled to the United States. The Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has contacted the New York consulate, which is in touch with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, to ensure Anna's mother is kept informed about the investigation and hearings. Brian and Anna's 3 sons are now in state custody because none of Brian's family members are willing to care for them. They cite Anna's mother's age and poor health, and her sister, who lives in Canada, has also declined to take in her nephews. The only person willing to take the boys in is Pamela Bond, a close friend of Anna's, who prefers this to them being separated and placed in different foster homes. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sydney Loof. Sydney Irene Loof was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska, to George and Susan Loof. She spent her childhood in Arcadia with her parents until 2000, when the family moved to Ney, where her mother worked as a special education teacher and her father was the school principal. Growing up, Sydney was an energetic and outdoor-oriented girl who loved nature. Her father, George, often took her fishing during her school years. She was also involved in sports, playing basketball and golf, where she showed promise. However, she developed scoliosis, which forced her to give up many of her favorite activities and ended her sports career. After graduating from high school in 2011, Sydney found employment at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. Despite moving from Norfolk to Lincoln for work, Sydney remained close to her family, who made an effort to stay in touch almost daily and regularly met for dinner. Although she lived independently, Sydney frequently returned to her parents' house. Sydney had been battling depression, feeling that the medications she was on were actually making her condition worse. Her mom, Susie, was deeply concerned and urged her to see a new doctor who prescribed different medications. During phone calls with her mom, Sydney's voice sounded increasingly optimistic as she reported that her mental state was improving. She was attempting to make positive changes in her life, including searching for a new job, as working in a store didn't fulfill her ambitions. However, she was still uncertain about her career goals, which contributed to her feelings of depression. By November 2017, Sydney's mental health had taken a turn for the worse, leading her to take antidepressants and occasionally smoke marijuana. Despite her family and friends offering support, she yearned for romance and love. As a young modern woman with an interest in the same gender, Sydney sometimes turned to social media to find potential dates. To expand her social circle and find a friend, she used Tinder, a popular dating app. In November 2017, Sydney met a man named Aubrey online, and they started exchanging messages. They quickly discovered they had a lot in common, including a love for gambling, hiking, and good food. After just 100 messages, they decided to meet in person on November 14th. Sydney visited Aubrey at his home in Wilbur, and their first meeting went really well. They hit it off and agreed to meet again the following day at Aubrey's house. Before their second meeting, Sydney worked her shift at the store, went home, and got ready. She even took a photo of herself and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." When Aubrey arrived, they drove off together. The next day, however, Sydney failed to show up for work, which was unusual for the normally reliable Sydney. Despite her high spirits in the days leading up to her disappearance, her family was worried when her coworkers informed them that she hadn't shown up. Sydney's mother, Susie, revealed that her daughter had been struggling with anxiety and depression in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sydney had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Sydney's family saw her. When Sydney's parents went to her apartment, they were extremely surprised to find that she had left her favorite cat, Mimsy, without food or water. This was extremely unlike the caring pet owner they knew Sydney to be. Concerned, they reported Sydney missing to the police. During a welfare check of Sydney's home, the police found the apartment locked and saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, the family remained adamant that something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, Sydney Loof was reported missing after failing to arrive at her workplace, the Menards store showroom on 27th Street in Cornhusker Highway. Sydney had a spinal condition that affected her gait, making her stand out in a crowd. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. According to her parents, Sydney told her friend on Snapchat on Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a man she met online the previous night and planned to meet up with her again that evening. Her car was found in Northeast Lincoln, and police conducted interviews, searching for any leads that could help locate Sydney. A massive search effort was launched to find Sydney, featuring highway billboards with her photo and a televised manhunt. Susie remained adamant that something had happened to her daughter after her date. To support her claim, she shared a screenshot of a Snapchat post by Sydney, captioned, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was planning to meet a woman named Aubrey, whom she met on Tinder. During the investigation, police examined Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from her workplace, which led them to identify a key person of interest. They traced Sydney's last phone signal to a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, likely close to Aubrey's residence, although they had no information about Aubrey's identity at the time. Authorities started looking for a man named Aubrey, who was the last person to see Sydney before she went missing. The problem was that no one knew Aubrey's real identity or if he even existed. Sydney's friend Brooklyn took matters into her own hands and decided to track down Aubrey using Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Aubrey's profile, and exchanged phone numbers with him. This allowed the police to finally learn Aubrey's real name, which was Bailey Boswell, a 26-year-old woman. Further investigation revealed that Bailey lived in an apartment near the cell tower where Sydney's phone was last connected. Bailey shared this apartment with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. Bailey Boswell, from a normal and wholesome family in Lyons, Iowa, grew up as a friendly and successful student who excelled in basketball and running. However, following her father's death, her life took a downward turn. She started keeping bad company and got involved with alcohol and illicit drugs. On a dating website, Bailey met Aubrey Trail, a man with a history of fraud, issuing fraudulent checks and theft. Aubrey had created a cult where he referred to himself as the Vampire Daddy and paid women $200 weekly to follow his unusual rules. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey faced a court order to pay over $40,000 in fraud reparations and had multiple misdemeanors against them. On November 19, 2017, they went into hiding. When police searched their apartment, they found that some walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which a neighbor confirmed. After a few days, the police located Aubrey and Bailey at a hotel in Branson, Missouri, and took them into custody a few weeks after Sydney's disappearance was reported. A thorough examination of phone records and Bailey's location data led the police to the gruesome discovery of Sydney's remains. Her body had been dismembered, with 13 parts found in black plastic bags in ditches in Clay County. Tragically, some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improperly disposing of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey, on the other hand, pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but guilty to improperly disposing of human remains. However, Aubrey's various statements were inconsistent, and he often appeared confused, changing his account of events and introducing new characters. He made bizarre claims, including that he was a vampire who could fly, and spoke about witchcraft. Aubrey claimed to be a cult leader and vampire, telling authorities he had witches in the cult who needed to kill another woman to gain powers. In one of his early court hearings, Aubrey admitted to killing Sydney Loof, but said it was an accident. He claimed to have paid Sydney $5,000 to participate in a threesome with 2 other women, which Sydney had agreed to. However, during the act, he strangled her with a cord by mistake. Aubrey also confessed to cutting Sydney's body into pieces, a ritual according to his beliefs, to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place. He believed this would help her reincarnate faster. However, the prosecution presented evidence contradicting Aubrey's story. Surveillance footage from November 14th showed Aubrey and Bailey checking into a Lincoln hotel near Sydney's home. The following day, they visited a home improvement store, buying a hacksaw, bleach, a folding saw, a stationary knife, and the bags used to store Sydney's remains. Furthermore, a surveillance camera caught Sydney encountering Aubrey at the Menards store on November 15th, unaware of the danger she was in. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing took place regarding the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof. Although separate trials were ordered for Bailey and Aubrey, the charges against them were essentially the same. The trials were held in Lexington because the defense attorneys successfully argued that a fair trial would be impossible in Wilbur due to the extensive publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution's case rested on the argument that Sydney's death was a premeditated murder, as evidenced by the fact that she was strangled and that the crime was carefully planned and executed. The jury listened to 3 other women who had previously dated Aubrey and Bailey, all of whom they met through Tinder. Each of these women had been intimate with Bailey and had also been involved with Aubrey. One of them shared that she had even gone on a trip with them after they met, during which Aubrey gave her $200 a week and invited her to join his group, which he called Witches, telling her that she would have to torture and kill someone to become a member. Another woman testified that Bailey had discussed breaking her fingers and dissecting a body in detail, revealing her fascination with torture. The prosecution pieced together the events of the fateful evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney had arranged to meet a woman she had known for a couple of days, with whom she had been chatting on Tinder. Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment, and they drove around in his car. The car eventually stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was coaxed into the apartment. Once inside, Bailey and Aubrey attacked her, strangling her with an extension cord on the living room floor. Afterwards, Bailey and Aubrey meticulously cleaned the apartment, which the prosecution argued was a premeditated act. The next day, November 16th, they dismembered Sydney's body and dumped her remains in Clay County. The court heard testimony from Jennifer, the landlord who stayed on November 16th. She drove into the garage and immediately noticed a strong chlorine smell that intensified when she entered the house. The medical examiner testified that Sydney's death was ruled a homicide by asphyxiation. Toxicology reports showed that Sydney had antidepressants in her system at the time of death. In addition to the missing organs, the upper left arm, from just above the elbow to below the shoulder, was also found to be missing from Sydney's body. The prosecutors sought the death penalty for both defendants, and if the sentence was deemed unjust, the case would be retried. However, Aubrey denied any involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying Sydney's remains. During his trial, Aubrey shouted that Bailey had no involvement in Sydney's death, claiming Bailey's innocence. In a dramatic turn, Aubrey then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade but survived and was detained until he made a full recovery. Aubrey testified he lied about Sydney Loof's death, admitting he met her in 2017 and paid her for illegal activities. He claimed Sydney died accidentally during an intimate act with an extension cord in November 2017. Aubrey confessed to dismembering and dumping her body, but maintained it was an accident, and he didn't seek help because he thought no one would believe him. Aubrey confessed to getting rid of Sydney's body, claiming it was an accident from an extension cord during intimate act. Bailey denied involvement, with her lawyers saying she was also a victim of Aubrey's manipulation. However, phone records and location data proved Bailey's involvement, tracking her near where Sydney's body parts were found. The court learned that Bailey initiated contact with Sydney and arranged a meeting. Bailey drove to Sydney's duplex on the evening of November 15th to pick her up. The prosecution claimed that Bailey took pleasure in discussing cruel acts and enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence presented in court revealed a planned crime on the day Sydney was killed. Bailey and Aubrey went to Home Depot around noon that day, where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter, as part of their plan. Bailey sent Sydney a text message inquiring about her day, and phone records and surveillance footage show that she sent the message from the Menards parking lot, where Aubrey was also present. Sydney, who worked at Menards, seemed unaware of Bailey's presence. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, stating that she was at Sydney's apartment and would pick her up soon. However, phone records indicate that instead of going on a date as Sydney believed, Bailey and Aubrey went to the apartment where they lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that the evidence only showed that Bailey was guilty of aiding and abetting the improper disposal of Sydney's body by buying bleach in garbage bags. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell received a life sentence. The Loof family had waited 3 long years, grieving and yearning for their Sydney, anticipating a verdict that would bring them solace. Prior to this, on July 11, 2019, a jury took less than 3 hours to convict Aubrey Trail of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. A 3-judge panel described his crime as cold and calculated. In the trial's second phase, determining whether he should face execution, county prosecutors secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail, fulfilling their promise. Consequently, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was put to death by lethal injection. Aubrey Trail, the con artist accused of brutally murdering Nebraska woman Sydney Loof, allegedly deceived his cult followers by claiming to be a flying mind-reading vampire with a coven of 12 witches. He claimed these witches gained their powers by killing people. Fortunately, in this real-life story, justice prevailed, and through the trial, the monster faced the end of his trail. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Valeria Vivano. Valeria Fernandez Vivano was born on May 29, 1996 in Laguna, a small commune near Santiago, Chile's capital city. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Miguel and Jacqueline Vivano. Valeria grew up with her older biological siblings, Michelangelo and Daniela. Her father worked for a transportation company, while her mother was a dedicated homemaker who focused on raising their children and creating a warm home environment. When Valeria started school, her parents decided to separate, which was a huge shock to her. Although they continued to communicate after the divorce, and her father remained involved in their lives, providing financial support, Valeria harbored resentment towards him. They would occasionally argue, sometimes not speaking for months, but they always reconciled. After the divorce, Miguel Vivano remarried and had 2 more children, becoming Valeria's half-siblings. Despite this, Valeria, Daniela, and Michelangelo maintained warm relationships with them. Jacqueline, on the other hand, never remarried, focusing on raising her children and later caring for her grandchildren from her older children. Valeria showed a strong-willed character, determination, and perseverance from a young age. She excelled academically, participated in sports, and demonstrated courage and a strong sense of justice, often putting others' needs before her own. Valeria's desire to help those around her, protect the vulnerable, and fight for justice likely inspired her to pursue a career in law enforcement. After graduating from high school, Valeria enrolled in the police academy in Santiago, where she graduated with honors in 2016 at the age of 20. The following year, she joined the Chilean police force and began working in the capital's serious crimes unit. From the start of her career, Valeria demonstrated herself to be a dedicated and passionate law enforcement officer, driven by a strong sense of justice. She was deeply committed to her job, performing her duties with diligence and always ready to respond to any situation at a moment's notice. Whether it meant leaving in the middle of the night to investigate a crime scene, pursuing suspects at personal risk, or providing emotional support to those who had lost loved ones, Valeria was always willing to go the extra mile. Her colleagues praised her as kind, cheerful, and friendly, yet she remained a consummate professional and trustworthy partner. Over nearly 5.5 years of service, Valeria received numerous accolades and awards, rapidly advancing in her career and earning the respect of her peers and the admiration of her superiors. A highlight of her career was representing her department in Spain, where she spent 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit, an experience that filled her with immense pride. By 2020, she had risen to the rank of assistant inspector. A 21-year-old rookie cop, Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales, joined the precinct where Valeria worked, fresh from the police academy. Valeria took him under her wing, becoming his mentor in his first job. A few months into their partnership, they got along fairly well. Not much is known about Lionel's upbringing, but it's believed he came from a wealthy and influential family with a high-ranking official as an uncle, which gave him a life of comfort and luxury. As a result, Lionel was self-absorbed, expecting everything to go his way. Valeria soon caught Lionel's attention, and he made several attempts to win her over, asking her out on dates, but she rejected him each time. Valeria was dedicated to her job and saw workplace romances as unprofessional. She was also strict with Lionel, viewing him as immature. Although Lionel was only 3 years younger, Valeria found his behavior childish and hoped to help him grow up. On May 29, 2021, Valeria turned 25. She celebrated her birthday at her mother's house, surrounded by many guests, including relatives, friends, and work colleagues. However, Lionel was not invited. Valeria intentionally left him out to avoid any potential awkwardness, as he had recently tried to rekindle their romance. When she talked to him about it, he only reaffirmed his feelings for her, which she wanted to keep private from their colleagues. Valeria looked upset despite the festivities. She was trying to conceal her sadness with a fake smile. The recent quarrel with her father had caused days of silence between them, and she had hoped he would put their differences aside and come to her party, giving them a chance to make up. But all he did was send a congratulatory message without even bothering to phone her. Jacqueline, Valeria's mother, noticed her daughter's distress and knew that the rift with her father was the cause of her sadness. Angry at her ex-husband's actions, she was convinced that Miguel would eventually reach out to Valeria and they would talk things through and reconcile. Tragically, Valeria and her father never got the chance to resolve their issues. 2 weeks later, she lost her life in a fatal shooting while on duty on June 13, 2021. Valeria was participating in street patrols and vehicle checks that night, searching for suspects related to a crime that had occurred the previous day in a suburb of the capital. The police had issued an alert for a white Kia Chato, believed to be driven by a suspected criminal who was likely armed and possibly accompanied by others in the car. Valeria was riding in a patrol car with her partner Lionel, driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gilardo. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and immediately gave chase, without waiting for backup. The officers successfully intercepted and blocked the suspect's escape. Canales and Vivano jumped out of their vehicle, guns drawn, and yelled for the offenders to surrender and exit their car with their hands raised. Just then, a single shot rang out, and in the ensuing chaos, Valeria clutched her side and fell to the asphalt beside the police car. Reinforcements arrived simultaneously, and her colleagues heard the shot and saw that she was wounded, but they couldn't fully comprehend what had happened or who had fired. The criminals took advantage of the momentary confusion, sped away, and escaped the scene. Despite the swift arrival of medics and her colleagues' efforts to stop the bleeding, Valeria's life couldn't be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists fought to save her life for several hours. Unfortunately, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital organs, Valeria passed away on the operating table, never regaining consciousness. Valeria's family rushed to the hospital after hearing the news, but they were too late. Miguel, her dad, was overwhelmed with grief and regret, haunted by their recent petty argument. His guilt was so intense, it put his own health at risk. Valeria died in the line of duty during an operation to catch dangerous criminals, hailed as a hero for giving her life to ensure others' peace and safety. Local media extensively covered the story, praising her courage and selflessness. The public was shocked and captivated by the arrests, and soon the suspects were identified as 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Cupin and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was not released due to his age. Both had previous convictions for minor crimes. In response to the arrests, Chile's president, Miguel Juan Sebastián Pinera, issued an official statement promising that those responsible would face the full extent of the law. As the investigation progressed, some facts didn't add up. Valeria's body was returned to her family after the autopsy and buried in a capital city cemetery, with hundreds attending the funeral. Her parents described the experience as a terrible nightmare. Notably, among those who carried Valeria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who seemed more grief-stricken than anyone else. However, other colleagues reported that there had been recent tension between Valeria and Lionel, to the extent that Valeria didn't even invite him to her birthday celebration. Legal proceedings started right after the funeral against those arrested the next day. Initially, everyone thought the guilty ones were caught and proving it would be easy. But it soon became clear the investigation was flawed, with key details missed and evidence ignored. A month and a half after the officer's death, 2 employees were suspended for their alleged role in the incident. Valeria's parents were called to the prosecutor's office, expecting new evidence. Instead, they were devastated to learn from prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco that their daughter died from a bullet fired by her colleague. Subsequent investigations showed that the fatal shot was fired from a service weapon held by one of Valeria's co-workers. A same-day ballistics test confirmed this, but the results were tampered with, and the bullet's characteristics, shape, caliber, and weight were incorrectly recorded in the evidence locker. Furthermore, the bullet had passed through Valeria's body, but it wasn't extracted. Instead, it was reported to have been extracted, and the entry and exit wounds in the forensic reports were switched. The shot was fired into her back, not her abdomen. Furthermore, the detainees who were on trial, claiming to have confessed to their involvement and were on the verge of imprisonment, began filing complaints. They alleged that their confessions were obtained through torture and threats, and the pistol they had with them that evening was not even loaded. Moreover, their involvement in the prior crime that prompted the interception plan that fateful night remained unconfirmed. A surprising twist emerged in the public's perception of Vivano, transforming her from a tragic hero who died in the line of duty to an innocent victim betrayed by her own colleagues. As a result, the main suspect shifted to Felipe Gilardo Ara, who was driving the police car, and Lionel Alejandro Contas Canales, Vivano's partner, who was seated in the back. Both were immediately suspended from duty. On August 5th, it was discovered that the fatal bullet came from a police-issued weapon. A document surfaced showing examination results that implicated Lionel as the prime suspect, as he was the only one with gunshot residue on his hands, a crucial finding that had been mysteriously left out of previous reports. Additionally, several other vital documents, including ballistics examination reports and the pathologist's conclusions, were improperly stored in an archive box that had not been thoroughly reviewed. It remains unclear whether this was an accident, an oversight, or a deliberate attempt to conceal crucial evidence. The police officers involved in the operation to catch the criminals surprisingly became suspects in the murder of their fellow officer. Along with the suspects already arrested, they participated in a reenactment of the events of that night to clarify what had happened. In the reenactment, Philippe, who was driving, explained that he could only see Valeria, who was sitting next to him in the front passenger seat, when she got out of the car. Lionel, who was sitting behind them, also exited the vehicle, but Philippe couldn't see what he was doing. According to Philippe, Valeria took just a few steps before a shot was fired, causing her to fall to the ground. At that point, Lionel rushed to help the injured woman and provide first aid to try to save her life. Lionel gave a different account of what happened, saying that he and his partner Valeria got out of the patrol car at almost the same time, but she rushed forward immediately after the shot was fired. He denied shooting his colleague, Valeria, and claimed that Philippe, the driver, should have seen him trying to help Valeria and confirmed this. According to Lionel, he was the first to assist Valeria and tried to stop her bleeding to prevent her from dying. The investigation managed to reconstruct the events, despite inconsistencies in the witnesses' statements. They found that Canales was behind his partner when the shot was fired, which corresponded with the bullet's trajectory. Furthermore, he was the only one with traces of gunshot residue on his hands. Lionel was arrested as prime suspect after secret reports and test results were released, while other detainees were freed on condition they stay local, lacking evidence to implicate them. But the officers' motives remained unclear. The prevailing theory is that a tragic accident occurred when an inexperienced young officer unintentionally fired his weapon while standing behind his partner. In a state of panic, he attempted to assist her. Later, when submitting his service weapon, he falsely claimed not to have fired it. However, the truth eventually came to light, exposing that influential relatives of the young officer exploited their power, wealth, and connections to conceal the incident, leading to fabricated reports, missing documents, contradictory evidence, and coerced testimony from detained individuals. Despite Canales' arrest, suspicions about Felipe's involvement persisted. Felipe was also armed with the same service weapons, was present at the scene, and could have accidentally fired the fatal shot. Additionally, Felipe had a history of using his weapon unjustifiably during an arrest, although no one was harmed on that occasion. The defense team, hired by Lionel's relatives, presented a theory that Felipe might have accidentally shot his colleague due to the identical service weapons, which could have been mixed up or intentionally swapped. Felipe's own testimony was inconsistent, and he claimed he couldn't accurately describe the events that took place. Despite this, the lack of gunpowder residue on the driver's hands suggested his innocence. Felipe's explanation that the residue came from when he was compressing the victim's wound was not believable, given that Valeria's blood stains remained on his hands. The investigation was widely criticized, and the victim's parents were left feeling desperate, leading to public outrage and a loss of trust in law enforcement. Following further investigation, Lionel remained the sole suspect. Lionel was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, in a surprise move, the Supreme Court later overturned the sentence, reducing his imprisonment to just 540 days. Valeria's family is now planning to sue the Chilean state, accusing the judges of corruption. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Belinda Temple. 1986 was the year Belinda started her college education in her hometown. Unlike her twin sister Brenda, who attended Steve Austin University, Belinda stayed close to home. Her decision was largely influenced by her relationship with Marshall Kelmy, who was 3 years her senior. Belinda was deeply infatuated with Marshall, and this relationship began during her high school years. However, Belinda's parents were not in favor of this relationship. They feared that being involved with Marshall would hinder their daughter's opportunities for a prestigious education. They also worried about the potential consequences of an early pregnancy, which might lead to Belinda dropping out of college altogether. The disapproval of Belinda's parents led to numerous arguments at home. Belinda's mother was particularly opposed to the idea of her daughter moving in with Marshall before marriage. She made her stance clear by stating, "He is nobody to you. Once you're married, you can move out, but until then, you have a home here." This remark seemed to only strengthen Belinda's resolve. In a bold move, Belinda and Marshall announced their decision to get married during a family dinner. Despite the tension, they shared their plans, which was met with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Belinda's mother was visibly upset but seemed resigned to their decision, gritting her teeth and remaining silent for the rest of the evening. In reality, Belinda had made up her mind to marry Marshall as a way to assert her independence and prove to her parents that she was capable of making her own decisions. They didn't have a grand wedding celebration. Belinda wore her sister's white dress, invited a few close friends, and she and Marshall signed the papers. Afterward, they strolled around the city, enjoying champagne and each other's company. The next day, Belinda packed her belongings and moved in with her husband, who was still living with his parents. They hadn't planned to rent a separate place. Getting married didn't change much in their relationship. As mentioned earlier, Belinda's primary reason for marrying was to gain independence and stop her mother's nagging. However, her new life turned out to be quite unpleasant. Less than 6 months later, Marshall started spending less time at home, claiming he was working late. In reality, he was seeing another woman. Belinda discovered this when she noticed her husband acting strangely. One day, she waited until his work hours ended and followed him, which is when the truth came to light. She saw Marshall walking hand in hand with a woman she didn't know, likely a colleague. The deceived wife, Belinda, left her husband, Marshall, after discovering his infidelity. She didn't create a scene, but instead packed her belongings and returned to her mother's house. Marshall tried to win her back, but Belinda was too proud to forgive him. They eventually got a divorce. A few years later, Belinda was pregnant and working part-time at a school. Despite her pregnancy, she was concerned about missing the upcoming basketball competition between schools and not being able to prepare her team properly. Her colleague, Richard Bachman, didn't share her enthusiasm and had often expressed his disinterest in teaching. Belinda couldn't understand why Bachman, a 40-year-old man who seemed uninvested in his job, still held his position. As a diligent teacher, Belinda noticed that one of her students, Riley Joe Sanders, a high school senior, had been absent from class for months. She reached out to her colleagues to determine if the issue was specific to her class or if Sanders was a habitual truant. Her colleagues told her that Sanders came from a troubled home and rarely attended school, implying that his absences were not Belinda's problem. That evening, Belinda decided to take further action. She visited Riley Joe Sanders' mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious conversation with her. Although the talk seemed to have an impact, it didn't quite yield the results Belinda had hoped for. Sanders began attending class and participating on an equal level with his peers. However, during a basketball game, when Belinda called out Sanders for pushing an opponent and exhibiting poor behavior, he responded with insults and threats, warning her to be careful, especially in the evenings. After her breakup with Marshall, Belinda had nothing left for her in her hometown. She decided to follow her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. It was there that Belinda found her true calling. Alongside her studies, she worked part-time as a basketball coach and had high aspirations. At the same university, Belinda met David Temple. Like her, he was a part-time coach but for soccer, and he also played for the university team as its captain. Soccer had been an integral part of David's life since childhood, and it was clear even then that he was destined to excel. He consistently performed well for his team, earning the respect of all his teachers. Despite his difficult nature, which could lead him to insult or even physically confront others, David's behavior was often overlooked because of his on-field performance. During games, he would become fully engaged and find it difficult to calm down for a long time afterward. However, one of his teammates later revealed that David's aggressive behavior was due to his use of steroids. David's behavior changed significantly when he was with Belinda. He became a caring and chivalrous partner, but with one major caveat: he would become aggressive and confrontational if he perceived anyone as a threat to their relationship. Belinda was well received by David's parents, who admired her love for sports, a common interest she shared with their son. However, Belinda's twin sister and friends were less than thrilled about her relationship with David. They had known Belinda as a strong-willed and independent person, but since being with David, she had become more subdued and focused on pleasing him. Her relationship with her family also suffered, with less frequent phone calls and visits, which naturally caused concern among her loved ones. As graduation approached, David and Belinda adopted a bull terrier named Shaq. After receiving their diplomas, they got married in 1999. January 1999, David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. With the due date nearing, doctors predicted Belinda would go into labor within a couple of weeks. As with many pregnant women, Belinda was frequently exhausted, and caring for their son Evan added to her fatigue. One evening, David decided to give his wife a break from household chores and allow her some rest. To minimize distractions, David took Evan for a walk in the park. As they strolled through the fresh air, their hunger grew, so they stopped at a cafe for a snack. After their cafe visit, David and Evan headed home. Upon arrival, David noticed the front door had broken glass. He quickly told Evan, "I'm going to take you to visit Harland for a bit, okay?" Without waiting for Evan's response, David led him to a neighbor's house, where family friends lived. Evan, struggling to keep up, asked, "Why can't we go to Mom's?" David, unsure of how to respond, said, "Mom's in the hospital right now." The neighbor, Quentin Harland, had just opened the door to unexpected visitors when David rushed past him, taking his son into the living room without a word. David then ran towards his own house, leaving Quentin confused. Quentin shouted to his wife to care for the child and followed David. "What's going on?" Quentin asked, but before David could respond, they reached David's house, where Quentin saw the front door was broken. Upon entering, Quentin saw the house was in disarray, with open closets and belongings scattered everywhere. A trail of blood led to the stairs, prompting Quentin to push David aside. Under the stairs, in the dressing room, they found Belinda lying face down with a severe head wound. David, seemingly in shock, didn't react. Instead, he took out his phone and called the police. Police officers quickly arrived at the scene, but they were initially unable to enter the house due to the Temple family's aggressive bull terrier, Shaq, who growled and barked at the unfamiliar men in uniform. One officer drew his gun in response, but David intervened, shouting at them to put their guns away and rushing to restrain the dog in the garage. Upon entering the house, the police assessed the scene and concluded that the perpetrators were likely burglars who had not expected Belinda to be home. Despite her pregnancy, they had shot her to eliminate her as a witness. When police started investigating a crime scene, they were baffled by how the burglar got past the fierce dog, Shaq, that guarded the house. They were also unsure how the perpetrator distracted the dog. Upon closer inspection of the front door, police found broken glass, but its positioning suggested it was broken while the door was already unlocked, which seemed strange. Inside the living room, a box on the nightstand caught their eye, containing jewelry such as earrings, rings, and a gold chain. What puzzled them was why the thief left the jewelry untouched. As police spent more time in the Temple family home, they became increasingly convinced that the whole scene was staged. In their experience, thieves usually take all valuables they can carry, but in this case, nothing appeared to be missing. The presence of the dog continued to raise suspicions, leaving them feeling that something was off. Regarding the murder, Belinda was shot in the back of the head with what was likely a 12-gauge shotgun while kneeling with their back to the killer. However, shotguns are an unusual choice for robbers due to their bulk and difficulty in concealing and transporting. This, combined with the fact that the murder took place at 4 p.m., makes it improbable that a thief would be openly carrying a shotgun at that time of day. When questioned by police about firearms in his home, David mentioned owning a couple of rifles, which he showed to the officers. Notably, the shotgun that could have been used in Belinda's murder was not among the firearms he presented. David went to the police station voluntarily to give a statement and detail the items that had been stolen. Despite appearing nervous, he was cooperative with the police. During this time, his son Evan stayed at Quentin's house, oblivious to what had happened. In 1996, David Temple and Quentin Harland were neighbors and co-workers at a school. They were close friends and often socialized together outside of work, watching sports and hosting barbecues with their families. However, their friendship became strained when Heather Scott, a new teacher, joined the school. Quentin was attracted to Heather, but she rejected his invitation to dinner. What Quentin didn't know was that David had also developed feelings for Heather, and they started a secret relationship. Quentin was angry and hurt when he found out that his married friend, who had a son, was involved with someone else. Despite his feelings, Quentin kept David's secret, even as their co-workers began to notice the romantic connection between David and Heather outside of school. Heather didn't know that David was married, as he didn't wear a wedding ring and kept his personal life private. Belinda had no idea about David's secret life. She once confided in Quentin about her suspicions that David was cheating on her, but Quentin quickly dismissed her concerns. "You're just being paranoid," he told her. "David is a devoted husband and family man. How could you think such a thing?" However, there were signs that something was off. David, who had once been extremely respectful towards Belinda, now frequently insulted her, even in front of others. He would call her fat, despite her only gaining a little weight after childbirth, and would often ask her to leave the room when they had guests, implying that her appearance was embarrassing. Belinda didn't stand up for herself or have a serious conversation with David about his behavior. Instead, she cried at night and felt deeply unhappy as a woman. Meanwhile, David was enjoying his new relationship with Heather. David became increasingly estranged from his family due to a new relationship with a coworker. He put more psychological pressure on his wife, Belinda, and their communication consisted only of insults. Although he never physically harmed her, the verbal abuse continued. That year, Belinda discovered she was pregnant again. The news made her forgive David's past transgressions, and she felt ecstatic. David attempted to appear as a happy father, but it seemed insincere. Sometimes, he would not come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask why because she feared his angry outbursts and the potential scandal that could follow. A pregnant Belinda often asked her husband David for help in preparing for the baby's birth, such as running errands, fixing up the nursery, and installing shelves. However, David consistently ignored her requests, leaving Belinda to handle everything on her own, including shopping, painting, and assembling furniture, despite being 8 months pregnant. As Christmas approached, Belinda suggested discussing gift ideas with David, but he proposed skipping gifts that year to save money for the baby. Given the doctor's warning that Belinda might go into premature labor, this seemed like a reasonable decision. However, on Christmas, David didn't even get Belinda a small gift. Instead, he announced that he was leaving to spend the New Year's holidays with friends on a hunting trip. Belinda confided in her sister, who immediately changed her plans to be with Belinda, ensuring she wouldn't feel abandoned, especially since labor could start at any moment. David, during the holidays, spent the time with Heather, who wore a gold necklace given to her by David as a Christmas gift. By 2007, it appeared that David Temple had all but moved on from his wife's murder, as if Belinda had never been a part of his life. The fact that it had been 5 years since the murder and the killer had yet to be caught seemed of little concern to him. He had married Heather in 2001, and together they were raising Evan. The police suspected David of wrongdoing, but they couldn't gather enough evidence to prove anything. While investigating the case files of burglaries in the neighborhood, they discovered that a house on the next street had been burglarized 8 days before the murder at the Temple house. The perpetrator was none other than Riley Joe Sanders, a persistent truant from the school where Belinda taught, who had previously threatened her. He was called in for questioning immediately. Riley had no alibi for the day of the murder, and his father owned a 12-gauge shotgun. However, when the police searched the Sanders house, they did not find the weapon. Realizing the police had reason to detain him, Riley confessed that he was with friends on the day of the murder. He had hidden this information because they were smoking pot in a large group, and he did not want to implicate his friends. As a result, the charge against Riley was dropped. In November 2004, police officers arrived at David's doorstep, handcuffed him, and informed him that he was being held on suspicion of murdering Belinda Temple. David denied the allegations. His trial began in 2007. The investigation revealed that David's motive for the crime was his new relationship with Heather. Colleagues of David testified that during Belinda's pregnancy, he boasted about replacing his fat and pregnant wife with the younger and more attractive Heather. According to the prosecution, David killed Belinda as soon as she returned home from work, as evidenced by her still wearing her work uniform and shoes. They alleged that he then staged a robbery, scattering belongings around the house, before quickly driving to the park with his son to create an alibi. The prosecution also highlighted several suspicious facts, including that nothing was stolen from the house, and a fierce dog in the yard would have prevented any stranger from entering. Furthermore, witnesses reported seeing David's car stopped near a rice paddy, where the murder weapon was likely discarded, with only his son Evan present in the vehicle at the time. However, the shotgun was never found in the area where the crime occurred. Heather testified that before Belinda's murder, her relationship with David was not serious, and she didn't even love him. This statement introduced uncertainty into the jury's decision, as it raised questions about David's motive. Would he really kill his wife over a non-serious relationship, or was Heather lying to protect him? In November 2007, David was sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, a friend of Riley Sanders came forward to the police to clear David's conscience. According to this friend, Riley had previously confided in him about taking his father's shotgun with the intention of robbing the Temple family home. Riley wanted to teach his teacher, David Temple, a lesson. Riley claimed that he had almost entered the house but was thwarted by a bull terrier that ran out of the garage. He shot at the dog but missed, and fearing the noise would attract neighbors, he quickly ran away. This new testimony was submitted to the court, prompting a review of the case. David was released from prison on bail while the review was underway. Meanwhile, Heather decided she no longer wanted to be married to someone who had spent so much time in jail and whose future was uncertain. She filed for divorce. The jury took a long time to deliberate on David's sentence. The case wasn't revisited until 2023, when David was still awaiting a final decision on his sentence. David was ultimately convicted and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Throughout the trial, his son Evan struggled to accept that his father was capable of committing such a heinous crime. Evan continued to support his father until the very end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shanynthia Gardner. Shanynthia Gardner was born in Memphis, Tennessee, in the late 1980s. Shanintia's childhood was relatively ordinary. She was a beautiful, slender, curly-haired brunette with a talent for music and a creative spirit. She had a gift for composing songs and singing, which earned her local recognition and fame. Her love for music was just one of her passions. In addition to singing, Shanynthia enjoyed fashion and photography. She was a natural in front of the camera and had an artistic eye for capturing everyday moments. Despite her many creative pursuits, Shanynthia was also devoted to charity and her faith. She regularly attended church and prioritized her family's needs. Her life seemed to be on a promising path, filled with potential and possibilities. Shanynthia was 14 years old when she met Dur Clayton through mutual friends. They quickly discovered common interests and became friends. As they grew older and graduated from high school, their friendship evolved into a romantic relationship. They were perceived as a serious and stable young couple, but had some minor run-ins with the law, including traffic violations and disorderly conduct. In 2008, Dur faced a serious accusation of assaulting a woman, although it was allegedly unintentional. Fortunately for him, the charges were eventually dropped. That same year, Shanynthia and Dur began living together, and they had a son. Shanynthia took on a caring motherly role not only to their son but also to Dur's 2 children from a previous relationship. Sonia Clayton, Dur's mother, considered Shanynthia a part of their family, not just she her son loved. Shaninthia's devotion to her children made her special in Sonia's eyes. Although the relationship between Shanynthia and Dur was short-lived, they maintained some contact after the breakup. In Sonia's opinion, Shanynthia remained a good partner and caring mother to Dur. Shaninthia's marriage to Martin Gardner marked a new chapter in her life. He brought joy and stability, and she won him over with her kindness and love for children. To Martin, Shanynthia embodied feminine tenderness and wisdom. Shanynthia and Martin's life together progressed quickly. In September 2013, they moved into an apartment in southeast Shelby County and started their life together. After their wedding, they welcomed their first child, Telone. The following year, Saya was born, and soon after, 2 more girls, Savi and Yazzie, joined the family. In total, Martin and Shanynthia had 4 children together, in addition to Shaninthia's child from a previous relationship. For the young mom, her children were always the top priority. She enjoyed her part-time work at the Children's Hospital and was also actively involved in a center that raised funds to support children in need. Helping others was her true calling, and she dedicated her life to it with gratitude. Friday, July 1st, 2016, began like any other ordinary day. At around noon, Shanynthia was speaking with her husband, Martin, over the phone. Her voice remained calm, as it typically was. She told her husband she was going to watch a movie with the kids, giving no indication that anything was amiss on this ordinary day. However, during a quiet conversation between the spouses, a sudden and inexplicable madness took hold of Shanynthia. She grabbed a kitchen knife and entered the living room, where she attacked her 6-month-old daughter, Yazzie. The defenseless baby was caught off guard and her life was brutally cut short by the person she trusted most. The eldest child, at just 7 years old, witnessed this horrific scene unfold before his eyes, unable to fully comprehend the tragedy. Panicked and desperate, he fled the house. Shanynthia pursued him, still armed with the knife, intent on continuing her rampage. She chased after Dur, but his terrified screams caught the attention of the neighbors. A couple of neighbors rushed outside after hearing screams and were met with a horrific scene that would haunt them. Shanynthia stopped attacking Dur when she realized she was being watched. However, the horror was far from over. Chania went back inside the house, where her children, Savi and Talon, were waiting. In a state of distress, she went upstairs to the bedroom where the younger children were, marking the end of their innocent lives. The witnesses quickly called emergency services, requesting help for Dur and his siblings. At that moment, no one could have predicted the tragic outcome that awaited the quiet neighborhood. When the sheriff's personnel arrived, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. Inside the house, they found 4 lifeless children, covered in blood. The sight was shocking. Shanynthia calmly called her husband, Martin, and confessed to killing their children. The house was now filled with blood and horror. The investigators had obtained a bloody knife. Chaplains and specialists were called in to provide support to Dur, who had endured unimaginable trauma and required immediate attention. The sheriff's department launched a major operation, cordoning off the apartment complex, including the golf area and country club. Shanynthia was taken into custody without bail, and her trial was swiftly scheduled for July 5th. Despite the heinous nature of her crimes, Shanynthia was still a mother and partner, someone who had once nurtured love, care, and joy. A friend of Shanynthia, Michelle Jaiman, actively defended Shanynthia on social media, countering the unjust accusations and emphasizing a key factor: postpartum depression. The case sparked discussions, with Dr. Joel Rissman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, noting that mothers killing their children is rare and often linked to mental health problems. Dr. Rissman also highlighted the state's insufficient mental health funding, which frequently leaves families without vital support. Dr. Diane Barnes, a specialist in psychology and postpartum health, clarified the distinction between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. She emphasized that these are 2 separate conditions with distinct symptoms. Although the exact nature of Shaninthia's condition required further examination, Dr. Barnes expressed skepticism that a woman experiencing postpartum depression would commit such acts, instead suggesting psychosis as a more plausible explanation. Dur's father did not believe Shanynthia was guilty. Although he was not his son's guardian, he was able to visit him after his relationship with Shanynthia ended, but this stopped in November 2014. He noticed Shanynthia becoming more radical and controlling. His attempts to contact his son were unsuccessful, and he was excluded from his life. Those close to Shanynthia noticed a significant change in her. She began experiencing discomfort, which turned into anxiety, paranoia, and panic attacks. Her behavior became unpredictable, and some suspected postpartum depression. This was a shock, as Shanynthia was seen as strong and dependable. She had always been in control, but now seemed to be struggling. Shaninthia's sudden change in behavior in March 2015 left many people baffled. At first, her friends and family couldn't understand what was happening. One day, she left work early, picked up her children, and drove them down an unfamiliar road, away from their home. Her husband, Martin, thought she was just going for a walk in a park, which was a normal part of her daily routine, so he wasn't immediately concerned. However, as the hours went by, Shanynthia never came home, which worried Martin greatly. He decided to alert the authorities to look out for his wife, who was driving with their 5 children. Shanynthia drove over 74 miles east, from Memphis to Corinth, but it's unclear why she chose that destination, as she didn't know anyone there. She was later found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, but the police didn't explain how she ended up there. Shanynthia had superficial cuts on her neck and one wrist. If she had attempted to harm herself, her children were the only witnesses, but they were too young to understand what was happening. Eventually, the authorities brought Shanynthia home. However, her behavior became even more unusual after that. She told Martin that someone was threatening her and their family, which shocked him, as she provided no details about the supposed threat or who was behind it. There had been no previous incidents of this kind. When Shanynthia was with family and friends, she began complaining about her job and workload, claiming it made her feel terrible. She soon started saying that some co-workers wanted to harm her. Despite these strange claims, Shanynthia showed no signs of being violent or abusive towards her children or others. The investigation into Shanynthia Gardner's case proved to be a challenging process. Craig Morton, her defense attorney, opted not to discuss the case with the media in its initial stages, deeming it premature for such comments. During the court hearing on July 5, 2016, Shanynthia remained silent, appearing via video link. Despite being questioned by Judge Lambert, she refrained from speaking. Following the trial, Shanynthia was transferred to the Mental Health Institute. Her relatives attended the courthouse but chose not to speak with reporters. Meanwhile, Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols intended to file a motion to preserve evidence, including information obtained from social media. January 2017 saw Shanynthia formally charged with 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a deadly weapon, another count of aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The investigation into the mysterious and gruesome events continued, leaving the community seeking justice and answers to numerous questions. During the hearing, loved ones of Shanynthia testified about the events of that fateful day. Sonia, Martin's mother, was shocked to learn of the tragedy and rushed to the scene to find her grandson, Der. Initially, she thought something supernatural was involved, but as the shock wore off, she considered possible motives. Sonia wondered if their potential divorce and fear of caring for 5 children alone might have driven Shanynthia to commit the horrific act. The trial was significantly delayed due to Shaninthia's multiple psychiatric evaluations. However, in 2021, the non-jury trial finally commenced. The defense centered its strategy around Shaninthia's mental illness, while the prosecution acknowledged her condition but argued that she could distinguish right from wrong and understood the illegality of her actions. In December 2021, Judge James of the Shelby County Criminal Court rejected the defense's argument, and Shanynthia Gardner was found guilty of all charges. 2 months later, Shanynthia, 34, appeared in court for sentencing, accompanied by her husband Martin. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each murder count, plus 15 years for each count of child abuse and neglect. Shanynthia can apply for parole only after serving 51 years. Considering the 5 years she spent in prison before sentencing, she will be eligible for parole in approximately 46 years, at the age of 80. After the sentencing, the prosecutor expressed agreement with the decision, citing that it aligned with their goal of achieving justice for Martin and his children. Upon hearing the verdict, Martin felt a sense of relief knowing that Shanynthia would no longer be able to harm any more children. An evening vigil was held at the apartment complex where the family lived, attended by neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers. The gathering was a tribute to the innocent victims, with attendees holding red and white candles and offering prayers for the departed souls. The Reverend Pastor of the Baptist Church emphasized that the vigil marked the beginning of the community's healing process. He noted that those present were united in their desire to support the surviving baby and his father during this challenging time. Dar did not attend the memorial ceremony, with his grandmother Sonia explaining to the media that he was too consumed by anger to participate. The president and CEO of the Children's Hospital where Shanynthia worked extended condolences on behalf of the hospital staff. Martin's colleagues created a social media account to support him with the funeral arrangements for his 4 children. At the ceremony, Martin displayed remarkable strength and dignity in his speech as he shared a few words about his children and family. He concluded by emphasizing that his home was once filled with happiness when his children and Shanynthia were present, and that he would always cherish this memory. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Samadi Fonseca Fernandez. Samadi was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. Her family and early life are not well documented. She spent her childhood in an area called Cuba, where she lived with her mother, Sonia Fonseca. Samadi attended a local school, where she demonstrated a challenging and conflicted personality from an early age. She had difficulty accepting rejection and often used force or deception to get what she wanted. People who knew her recall that Samadi's striking appearance and perfect figure made it easy for her to charm men, but she struggled to maintain relationships. Her beauty and charisma were matched by her greed and vanity, which led her to prioritize material wealth and self-interest above all else. This attitude often discouraged potential partners. Additionally, Samadi became intensely jealous and aggressive after brief relationships. Samadi's doll-like appearance led to her working as a Barbie lookalike at a large Universal bookstore for several years. This earned her a flattering nickname that stuck with her throughout her life. After high school, Samadi had in love with a successful local TV journalist named Osvaldo Fernando Ballery, who was 16 years her senior. Samadi had a long and serious relationship with Osvaldo, with whom she had 2 children, Christopher and Christina. However, due to constant scandals and jealousy, they separated in 2012. After Osvaldo's sudden death, it was discovered that he had not included Samadi in his will. Samadi took matters into her own hands and seized Osvaldo's house, changing the locks to prevent his relatives and heirs from entering. She also took some valuable items that belonged to Osvaldo. His family members were outraged and went to court to accuse Samadi of theft. The police eventually forced Samadi to leave the house, but she was not charged with a crime. Samadi had other relationships, including one with Miguel Angel Perez, with whom she had a daughter named Maria. This relationship was reportedly official, but ended in divorce after a few years. Samadi allegedly gave her youngest daughter her lover's surname without his knowledge or consent, contradicting claims that she was unmarried at the time. Interestingly, some of her lovers have mysteriously disappeared or died under unclear circumstances, yet this trend went unnoticed for a long time. For instance, one of Samadi's lovers went missing shortly after deciding to end their relationship with the reportedly temperamental and aggressive woman. Despite relative suspicions of her involvement, his disappearance remains unsolved due to lack of concrete evidence. Another former lover, Diaco, met a tragic end after breaking up with Samadi. His murder was initially attributed to a botched robbery, but the perpetrators were never caught. Speculations about Samadi's role in the crime persisted, albeit without solid proof. Her most notable alleged victim was Gerardo Cruz, a Costa Rican native born in December 1992 in San Jose. Gerardo never knew his biological father, who left the family before his birth. His mother, Ana Patricia, later married Hermes Rodriguez, who adopted and raised Gerardo as his own. Gerardo's younger sister, Milena, was born a few years after him. He had a peaceful and carefree childhood and youth. Gerardo attended a regular school, enjoyed motorcycles, and met his true love, Carol, at a young age. By 23, he, Carol, and their 4-year-old daughter Genesis moved into his aunt and uncle's house in San Sebastian, a suburb of the city. Gerardo took a job at a local bakery to support his family. They were happy, especially with the news of a second child on the way. In the summer of 2015, Gerardo met Samadi, a 40-year-old woman who regularly visited the bakery. She was attractive, fashionably dressed, and flirtatious. As Samadi aged, she began to have relationships with younger men, likely flattered by their attention. Despite their nearly 20-year age difference, Gerardo became infatuated with Samadi and started secretly meeting with her. She visited the bakery almost daily, catching the attention of other employees. Samadi often brought her 19-year-old daughter, Christina, to the bakery. Initially, Gerardo balanced his family life and secret meetings with Samadi without either woman knowing about the other. However, Gerardo soon let his guard down, boasting to friends and colleagues about his relationship with Samadi, describing her as a terrific mistress who spoiled him with gifts. Rumors about Gerardo's affair soon reached his mother, who attempted to persuade him to end the relationship. The affair was short-lived, ending in October 2015, when Samadi discovered that his mistress, Gerardo, was married with a pregnant wife and a young daughter. Upon learning this, Samadi became enraged. She began harassing Carol, Gerardo's wife, with threatening calls and messages, warning her that Gerardo would be harmed if he didn't return to her exclusively. Gerardo apologized to his wife and reconciled, keeping their family intact. He underestimated Samadi's malice, thinking she would move on and calm down after the breakup. However, Samadi's vindictiveness was more intense than Gerardo anticipated. Shortly after the breakup, Gerardo witnessed a disturbing incident. While walking downtown, Gerardo noticed an older man secretly filming under a young girl's mini-skirt with his phone. Outraged, Gerardo took out his phone to record the scene. He then approached she, told her what was happening, and advised her to report the incident to the police. Gerardo chased the man for about 2 minutes, trying to get a clear shot of his face on camera. During the chase, Gerardo asked loudly if the man was enjoying taking photos of his sister's underwear without their consent. The man eventually jumped into a taxi and escaped. That night, Gerardo posted the video on his social media page, and it quickly went viral. Internet users identified the man as Luis Solmano Delgado, a former Ministry of Finance employee. As a result, Gerardo became a national celebrity, giving daily interviews to newspapers and appearing on TV and radio shows. He condemned Delgado's actions and stated that he had no regrets about exposing him. However, Delgado's lawyers began working against Gerardo, accusing him of violating the law by distributing the video. They prepared a lawsuit against him, which left Gerardo surprised and confused. He couldn't understand why he was being judged for exposing his actions, rather than the man being held accountable for his behavior. Gerardo's last interview was on October 7th at a local radio station. Feeling confident and believing he had nothing to hide, he spoke openly. The following day, Gerardo had plans to meet his friend Oswald after work, but he suddenly canceled, citing an unexpected emergency. It was later revealed that he had received a message from Samadi, luring him to the park that evening under the pretext of another interview. Gerardo had no reason to suspect anything was amiss and trusted his former lover. After finishing work, he went to the agreed meeting point, but instead of journalists, 2 unknown men were waiting. They took his bag, assaulted him, stabbed him multiple times in the chest and stomach, and then fled. Before losing consciousness, Gerardo managed to call a friend and report the incident. The friend immediately alerted the police and medical services. Thanks to the swift response, Gerardo was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save his life for 42 days. He underwent numerous operations, but unfortunately, they were unable to save him. Gerardo passed away on November 19th in the intensive care unit. Initially, multiple theories emerged about the crime. The first theory suggested it was a robbery murder. Gerardo was indeed attacked in a park at night, his bag was stolen, and he was stabbed with a knife, which made it appear to be a typical theft. However, Just a few days before, Gerardo had released a sensational video that compromised a well-known former government official, leading to a second theory, that the murder was an act of revenge. The media openly speculated that the former government official may have hired hitmen to kill the young man who had damaged his reputation. The murder sparked intense debate in the press, with protesters demanding that the perpetrators be caught and brought to justice. The police explored various theories, searching for other potential enemies of Gerardo. For months, the investigation stalled. However, in May 2016, a breakthrough came when footage from a street surveillance camera was discovered. The video showed two men fleeing the scene where Gerardo was fatally attacked. These individuals immediately became the prime suspects, and the police worked to identify and apprehend them. The footage proved to be crucial evidence, and once it was made public, the case started to move forward. It was repeatedly shown on news programs, with viewers asked to take a close look as the individuals could be dangerous. Police created rough sketches of the suspects and described their physical characteristics. One of the suspects soon came forward, hoping that cooperating with the investigation would lead to a reduced sentence. The information provided by the cooperating suspect led investigators to several accomplices and the crime's organizers, Samadi and her daughter Christina. All individuals involved in the crime were eventually taken into custody. Those arrested included Ronald Archie, a cab driver who helped locate the perpetrators, Cesar Chavez, a laborer who acted as an intermediary, and Omar Costa, a young miner who directly participated in the attack and had been tracking the victim on the day of the incident. The investigation revealed the roles and connections of all parties involved through phone records and text messages. Samadi, who had meticulously planned the crime, had enlisted the help of her daughter Christina. Together, they recruited friends Ronald and Cesar to find hitmen to kill Gerardo, staging it to look like a botched robbery in a nighttime park. They were later joined by Omar, who was responsible for ensuring the victim went to the prearranged location. Samadi personally chose October 7th as the date for the massacre. On that day, she was in frequent contact with all parties involved, assigning roles and verifying that everyone adhered to the plan. Gerardo was attacked, stabbed multiple times, and robbed of his bag and jacket. These stolen items were later given to the police as evidence. The primary evidence against Samadi was a series of text messages detailing the murder plan and each participant's role. Samadi was so confident she wouldn't get caught that she didn't bother deleting the incriminating messages. Her motive for the crime was jealousy. She didn't want to share her lover with his wife. If she couldn't have him, no one would. She carefully planned the crime, involving her own daughter, who assisted her throughout. Samadi and her daughter were immediately arrested, with no possibility of bail due to the risk of them fleeing the country. Their accomplices were also detained, except for Omar, the youngest participant, who was handed over to juvenile authorities. The investigation spanned a year and a half, concluding in December 2017 when the trial of all parties involved in the criminal conspiracy commenced. It was revealed that Samadi had a history of run-ins with the law, including a prior arrest for forging documents to obtain state benefits, for which she received only a fine. New information also emerged about Miguel Angel Perez, ex-husband of Samadi. It was discovered that Samadi had given their child Perez's surname without his consent. She then successfully petitioned the court to order him to pay child support, which he did for over 3 years. However, it was later uncovered that the entire process had been fraudulent. As a result, Samadi was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a substantial fine. During the trial, Gerardo's wife testified that she had been aware of his affair with Samadi. She stated that Samadi had threatened Gerardo with death, but he had not taken these threats seriously. The primary motive behind the crime, as previously stated, was Samadi's jealousy and wounded pride, stemming from her inability to accept that her younger lover had chosen to remain with his wife. Thanks to phone records, it was discovered that the mother and daughter had planned the crime together. Additionally, after the release of the CCTV footage showing the killers, Christine had a nervous breakdown. She called her mother, sobbing, and was close to going to the police to confess. However, her mother calmed her down, assuring her that the investigation would not lead to them. The verdict was announced on January 23, 2018. According to the court's decision, Samadi was sentenced to 30 years in prison, while Christina, Ronald, and Caesar each received 25-year prison sentences. One of the killers was sent to a juvenile detention center, and the other had not been found at the time. Omar, who had been stalking the victim, was acquitted. The victim's family was awarded $140,000 in compensation for their loss. After the verdict, the family expressed gratitude to the court for the fair punishment of Gerardo's killers. However, it soon became known that Samadi and Christina's lawyers had filed an appeal to reduce their sentences. As a result, each participant's sentence was reduced by 5 years. Samadi is currently serving her 25-year sentence in a Costa Rican women's prison.